Rick was thrown hard across the dusty floor of the desolate wasteland. He lay there, wincing in pain, his mind racing with fear. He thought he might be dying. Just as despair began to set in, his mentors emerged from the swirling smoke. Instead of rushing to his aid, they stood over him, their faces beaming with pride. "You've come a long way in 2 years," they said, their voices filled with admiration. "You're ready for the E-rank adventurer exams." Rick was grateful for their praise, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed medical attention. The pain was intense, and he was worried about his injuries. Normally, the adventurers in this world are all young people due to all the strain that it would put on a person's body, but there are still some adults who never give up on their dreams. Rick approaches the reception desk, ready to get his exam ticket for the tournament. As the receptionist scans his details, she suddenly looks up with recognition and excitement. She remembers him from before and starts to chat about their past. Rick takes a moment to jog his memory and then recalls that they worked together 2 years ago. She'd have been really surprised when he left his job abruptly, and even more so when she heard he had chosen to become an adventurer. Rick feels a bit awkward because, at his age, it's unusual for people to start a new career as an adventurer, especially when they're in their 30s. He feels a bit self-conscious about how different his path is from what most people expect at his stage in life. Typically, adventurers begin their careers at G rank when they are teenagers, and it usually takes them about a year or two to advance to E rank. The receptionist, intrigued by Rick's current status, asks him what he has been doing for the past 2 years since she hasn't heard anything from him. Rick shares that he has spent most of that time secluded in the mountains, where he dedicated himself to intense training with his mentors to enhance his abilities. Just as they are having this conversation, the usual drunkard from the guild stumbles over to the front desk. He begins to flirt with the receptionist in a way that is both loud and inappropriate. Even though the receptionist tries to indicate that she is busy with her duties and does not wish to engage, the drunkard persists, becoming more aggressive and disrespectful. As the situation escalates and the receptionist looks increasingly uncomfortable, Rick notices and decides it's time to step in and handle the situation himself. Rick calmly grabs the drunkard and guides him away from the receptionist, using a light tap to his stomach that is just strong enough to put him out of commission without causing any real harm. The receptionist, looking a bit embarrassed by the whole scene, quickly apologizes to Rick for the trouble the drunkard has caused. Rick, with a reassuring smile, tells her not to worry about it. He explains that he used to work as a receptionist himself, and even now, he still can't quite understand why the guild allows alcohol in their establishment. Once he has his exam number in hand, Rick makes his way outside. There, he is greeted by Renette, a maid who has been patiently waiting for him. She asks if Rick has completed his registration, and he confirms that he has, expressing his gratitude for her patience. While thanking her, Rick's attention is caught by Renette's prominent features, which he can't help but notice as he takes in her appearance. When Renette notices Rick's wandering gaze, she directly calls him out, making it clear that she's seen what he's looking at. Trying to divert the conversation, Rick enthusiastically talks about how excited he is for the upcoming exam. Meanwhile, back inside the guild, a crowd of adventurers is gathered around the drunk guy, marveling at the handprint left on his armor. This armor, which is made from very dense steel, has a clear imprint, and everyone is stunned by the display of strength required to make such a mark. As they talk, 2 new figures enter the guild. They quickly recognize the unconscious drunkard from a mugshot they had seen before. The man's name is Domold, and he's an A-rank adventurer with a serious criminal record, including 30 counts of assault. The revelation of Domold's identity causes a stir among the adventurers, who are now even more curious about the strength of the person who took him down. The receptionist soon realizes that Rick must be the one who knocked out the A-rank adventurer, Domold. She starts to think that if Rick is strong enough to take down someone of Domold's caliber, he might actually be more than qualified for the tests he's going through. In the meantime, Rick is undergoing his physical exam, and when his height is measured, it turns out he's about 5'8". The medical team is quite surprised to see Rick participating in these tests at the age of 32. They find it unusual because typically, people his age are not usually found in such situations. After completing the physical examination, all the candidates are taken to the next room. Here, they are instructed to place their hands on a large, mystical crystal ball. This crystal ball is designed to measure the level of mana each person has. As they lay their hands on the ball, it begins to glow. The intensity and color of the glow reflect the amount of mana a person possesses. The brighter the light, the higher the mana level, and the staff watches closely to assess each applicant's magical strength. As each candidate places their hand on the glowing crystal ball, they each receive different results, with the highest mana reading coming in at a C rank. When it's Rick's turn, however, the orb hardly lights up at all. The examiner, seeing this, gives Rick an F for his mana score. The other candidates start laughing and making fun of Rick for having such a poor result. As Rick leaves the room, he can hear their jeers and mockery. Just as the examiner calls for the next person to step up, the crystal ball suddenly shatters into pieces on its own. For the next test, the candidates are asked to strike a green rod with all their strength. This rod is a special slime bag designed to absorb impacts without getting damaged, so there's no worry about causing harm to it. Rick recalls a time when he trained with a similar slime bag and remembers one of his mentors telling him he needed to be strong enough to break through a golden slime bag using only his fists. This memory fuels Rick's determination as he prepares for the test, ready to show what he's capable of despite the earlier setback. Rick had doubts about whether he could ever accomplish such a feat since a golden slime bag is as tough as a dragon's fang. However, his mentor insisted that breaking one was the minimum requirement to become an adventurer. Motivated by his mentor's own ability to shatter one with a single punch, Rick committed himself to training relentlessly. He practiced until his fists were raw, sometimes hitting the bag up to 50,000 times a day. Despite hating the grueling regimen, he pushed through, knowing it was crucial for his goal. Now back in the present, the candidates are lined up to test their strength against the slime bag. One by one, they deliver powerful strikes. After the first person kicks the bag with all his force, the next candidate is introduced. It turns out to be the second son of the prestigious Derrier family. Even though he is only 11 years old, it's rumored that his magical abilities are as strong as those of a C-rank adventurer. As the young boy takes his turn, he casts a spell called Hell Fling. This spell surprises everyone, including Rick, though Rick's surprise comes from the spell's small size. The little fireball flies through the air and hits the target with precision, causing the judges to look on with admiration. Rick's amazement grows because the fireballs he remembers from his magic teacher were much more powerful and intense than this one. He starts to think that perhaps the boy's fireball is indeed as strong as his teacher's, but maybe it's just been made smaller to avoid causing damage to the building. As the test continues, Rick prepares for his turn. When he approaches the slime bag, the examiner calls him over and asks if he is really over 30 years old. Rick confirms that he is indeed in his 30s, and the examiner then tells him that, given his age, it might be unusual for him to be participating in such a test. Rick usually started training early to become a good adventurer. His mana exam score was bad, and people thought he should quit. He knew people were judging him because he was old. He wanted to give up, but he remembered how hard he worked. He punched slime bags until his knuckles bled, but he kept punching. He thought about giving up many times, but he kept going. He knew that if he gave up, he would regret it for the rest of his life. So he kept training, even though it was hard. He was determined to prove everyone wrong. He knew that he had to keep going, no matter what. Rick is determined to prove that all his years of training and enduring pain have paid off, even though his age puts him at a disadvantage. He is ready to give it everything he's got, and with that resolve, he draws back his arm and prepares for a powerful punch. When he finally strikes the slime bag, it bursts apart, splattering everywhere and shooting through the wall, leaving everyone in the room stunned. Rick himself is taken aback, as he hadn't expected the bag to break so easily. The crowd watches in awe, and the young boy who had been waiting for his turn is visibly frustrated. This was supposed to be his moment to shine, but Rick's incredible display of strength has stolen the spotlight, leaving the boy feeling disheartened and upset. The surprising outcome has everyone talking, and Rick's unexpected feat of power becomes the center of attention, overshadowing the boy's earlier performance. The young boy, who had hoped to shine brightly in the tests, reluctantly comes to terms with his current defeat by Rick. He acknowledges that his strength lies more in defensive magic and resolves to use the next test as an opportunity to showcase his talents and surpass Rick. However, as the new test begins, the boy is left utterly speechless and in awe when he witnesses Rick effortlessly tank a powerful fourth nature spell. This display of mastery leaves everyone in the room, including the boy, completely amazed and taken aback. The examiner, clearly impressed, compliments Rick on his remarkable ability to block such a formidable attack with apparent ease. Rick, grateful for the praise, feels encouraged as he is genuinely giving his all in the tests. Despite the examiner's praise, there is a lingering doubt about Rick's true level of effort. The examiner suggests that Rick might be holding back because he has only used first nature spells to defend himself so far. The examiner recommends that Rick attempt to use more advanced defensive magic to better demonstrate his abilities. Rick, however, clarifies that he is only proficient in first-order spells and does not know how to perform any higher-level magic. He assures the examiner that he is truly putting forth his best effort and working as hard as he can with the skills he possesses. The examiner is completely taken aback when Rick reveals that he can only use first-order spells. Given Rick's impressive control over his mana, it seems almost impossible that someone so skilled is limited to such basic magic. The examiner struggles to reconcile this with Rick's abilities, finding it hard to believe that someone with such precise and effective mana control would only know elementary spells. Despite this, Rick remains unfazed, confidently asserting that his first-order spells are more than sufficient to handle any challenges or attacks the examiner might use against him. This confident stance offends the examiner deeply, making him feel disrespected and underestimated. Determined to show Rick that he should not be taken lightly, the examiner decides to escalate the situation. He begins preparing to cast a formidable fifth-order spell, a much more advanced and powerful type of magic, intending to demonstrate to Rick that he should not underestimate the examiner's capabilities or the seriousness of the tests they are undergoing. As he casts the spell and unleashes a shock cyclone, a massive shockwave echoes through the kingdom so far that even a knight on the other side of town could hear it. A few minutes later, Sylvester arrives at the exam center to figure out what's going on. Over here, he is informed that an F-rank adventurer managed to completely destroy a slime bag with his bare hands and perfectly block a fifth nature spell while only using basic defense magic. Sylvester thinks she must be playing a prank on him or something, but she is dead serious about everything she just told him. At the moment, Rick is focused on completing the written part of his exam, and he appears to be quite sure of himself as he works through it. He finishes the written test with a sense of confidence, knowing that he has put his extensive knowledge to good use. Afterward, Rick takes a break with Renette, who is curious about how he felt the written portion went. Rick responds with certainty, telling her that he's confident he scored 100% on the test. He feels this way because of his 14 years of experience working as a receptionist for the guild, which he believes has given him all the knowledge needed to ace it. Despite his strong performance on the written part, Rick admits that he is still a bit uncertain about his overall scores and whether they will be sufficient to pass the exam. Renette asks if he is concerned about his performance in the practical sections of the exam, but Rick reassures her that he feels he did well in those areas too. He remains optimistic, though he knows that the final results will ultimately determine if he has done enough to succeed. Despite Rick's initial confidence, he is troubled by the F he received on the mana exam. This low score leaves him anxious about how it might affect his chances of passing overall. He hopes that his strong performance in the other parts of the exam will make up for it, but he remains unsure. Renette notices Rick's concern and tries to reassure him, reminding him of all the hard work and intense training he put in to prepare for this exam. She believes that this preparation should still play a significant role in his success, even if he struggled with the mana test. In the midst of this, Fried, the kid from earlier, storms up to Rick. Fried is visibly angry and starts yelling at Rick. He accuses Rick of overshadowing his own performance. Rick is puzzled by this reaction and assumes that Fried might be lost or confused, so he offers to assist him. Fried's frustration stems from the fact that he had hoped today would be his moment to shine, showcasing his exceptional skills and impressing everyone around him. However, Rick's outstanding performance has unintentionally stolen Fried's moment in the spotlight, leaving Fried feeling humiliated and defeated. Fried's tears and anger are a stark contrast to Rick's more composed demeanor, making the situation even more awkward. Rick, trying to smooth things over, explains to Fried that he had no intention of overshadowing him. As he speaks, Fried's sister arrives on the scene, her eyes immediately landing on her distressed brother. Upon seeing Fried crying, she wastes no time and begins shouting at Rick with clear frustration. Rick, feeling a bit bewildered, asks if she is indeed Fried's sister. She introduces herself as Angelica Darmut, her tone still sharp. Fried, still seething, promptly tells Angelica that this 40-year-old man has ruined his chance to shine. Rick, now feeling a mix of confusion and offense, corrects Fried, saying that he is actually only 30 years old. Despite Rick's correction, Angelica and Fried persist in referring to him as a 40-year-old, which only adds to Rick's discomfort and frustration. The situation becomes increasingly awkward as Rick tries to reconcile the misunderstanding while dealing with their unrelenting comments. As the conversation heats up, Angelica, clearly frustrated and ready to take action, decides to escalate things. She throws her glove at Rick with a decisive motion, aiming to challenge him to a duel. Rick, not immediately catching on to the significance of this gesture, picks up the glove with the intention of keeping it clean and undamaged. He doesn't realize that in the customs of nobility, picking up a thrown glove is a serious and formal acknowledgement of a challenge to a fight. This action is considered a declaration of intent to engage in combat. Angelica, however, is thrilled by Rick's response. She interprets his action as an acceptance of her challenge and is eager to set things in motion. Without hesitation, she quickly organizes a location where they can hold the duel. Her excitement is palpable as she makes arrangements, clearly looking forward to the upcoming fight. Rick, meanwhile, is caught off guard and puzzled. He starts to understand that he has inadvertently agreed to a duel, but he's also aware that he must now prepare for the fight. The situation has escalated from a simple misunderstanding to a formal challenge, and Rick realizes that he must face Angelica in this duel, a reality he hadn't anticipated but now must confront. Angelica, with a determined look in her eyes, declares that she is eager to exact punishment on Rick for making her brother cry. She emphasizes that if they are going to engage in a duel, they must adhere to the established rules. In the Film Kingdom, duels are governed by specific customs, which include the right of the winner to impose a penalty on the loser. Angelica makes it clear that, should she win the duel, she will enforce a penalty that is particularly harsh. The loser will be required to serve the winner for the rest of their life. This penalty is not just a form of punishment, but also a way to assert dominance and ensure that the terms of the duel are taken seriously. Angelica's seriousness about the rules and her desire for retribution set the tone for the upcoming fight, making it clear that she is fully committed to winning and enforcing the penalty she has chosen. Rick, now understanding the gravity of the situation, realizes that this duel is not just a simple fight but carries significant consequences if he loses. Angelica, it turns out, is a second-class royal knight, but Rick has no idea what that really means in terms of strength. Seeing his confusion, Rionette steps in to provide some much-needed context. She explains that a second-class knight is roughly equivalent to a B-rank adventurer. Rick's eyes widen in shock as he realizes that B-rank adventurers are incredibly powerful, capable of taking down enormous monsters on their own without breaking a sweat. This revelation makes Rick nervous as he understands that facing someone with such formidable skills could be very challenging. However, Rionette tries to calm him down, suggesting that he shouldn't worry too much. She even asks Rick to be cautious and hold back during the duel to avoid accidentally causing serious harm or even killing Angelica. Rionette's concern reflects her understanding of the potential dangers of the fight, and she wants to ensure that Rick's overwhelming strength doesn't lead to unintended consequences. Rick feels overwhelmed at the thought of facing someone as strong as a B-rank adventurer like Angelica while he is still at F rank. He struggles to gauge how his current strength compares and worries about how he will measure up. Rionette notices his anxiety and encourages him to trust in all the hard training he has endured over the past 2 years. Suddenly, vivid memories of the grueling and traumatic training sessions come rushing back, causing Rick to feel nauseous and vomit. Rick angrily blames Rionette for making him relive such painful experiences, but she reminds him that if he could endure all those harsh training sessions, he should be able to handle Angelica without too much trouble. Rionette reassures him by pointing out that he is a member of the strongest party on the continent, which means he should have more confidence in his abilities. Her words are meant to bolster his self-belief and remind him of his own strength, even if he is feeling uncertain about his capabilities right now. Rick comes to the realization that Rionette is right, and he steels himself to face Angelica without letting fear get the best of him. Although he still feels unsure about how his current strength will stand up against a second-class knight like Angelica, he decides there is no point in dwelling on his doubts any longer. Angelica, on the other hand, is fully confident in her superior strength. She assures Rick that she will hold back during their fight to avoid seriously harming him, and then begins to prepare her attack. With a burst of speed, Angelica uses her blink step ability to dash around Rick, aiming to demonstrate just how fast she really is. Her remarkable speed has earned her the nickname Lightspeed Angelica, and she is eager to impress Rick with her agility. While Rick is indeed taken aback by her swiftness, his surprise is not exactly for the reasons Angelica expects. He is more focused on processing the implications of her speed and preparing himself for the duel ahead. Angelica, with a confident smirk, declares that she will now finish Rick off with her next attack, making a show of her blink step technique. She moves swiftly, dashing towards him with all her speed. But as Rick watches her approach, he is completely taken aback. To his surprise, Angelica seems to be moving in slow motion compared to what he expected. Despite her impressive reputation and the nickname Light Speed Angelica, she is moving at a pace that is much slower than his usual running speed. The disparity between her supposed speed and her actual performance is so stark that Rick can't help but think the hype around her title was highly exaggerated. He easily sidesteps her attack with minimal effort. Angelica, stunned and confused, cannot understand how Rick, an F-rank adventurer, is capable of keeping up with her, especially when it should be beyond the abilities of someone at his rank to match her agility. Angelica, baffled by Rick's ease in dodging her attacks, tries to reassure herself by thinking that she must have just gotten unlucky this time. Determined not to let it happen again, she prepares to use Blink Step once more, aiming to demonstrate her true speed. However, to Rick, Angelica still appears to be moving at a much slower pace than he anticipated. He's beginning to question how she could have reached B rank with such a slow speed. As Rick starts to brace himself to dodge her next move, he notices Angelica stumbling over a rock. In her moment of clumsiness, she accidentally activates a rare and powerful move, the vertical B-blade attack, for a brief moment. This unexpected slip causes her attack to become erratic and unpredictable, further complicating the fight. Rick finds himself struggling to dodge Angelica's erratic and unpredictable attacks after she stumbles and unintentionally triggers the vertical B-blade move. Each strike comes at him from unexpected angles, and he realizes he can't keep up with the sudden shifts in her attack pattern. By the time Angelica finally regains her composure and stops the chaotic assault, Rick feels disheartened, thinking that his strength might not be as impressive as he thought since he was caught off guard by the unpredictable nature of her moves. At the same time, Angelica is equally surprised by how things turned out. She hadn't planned for the attack to become so wild or difficult to control. It just happened by accident. Angelica tries to maintain her composure and puts on a confident smile, saying that she's genuinely impressed Rick managed to dodge her last attack despite it being part of her intended strategy. She explains that if he could handle that, she will have to push her speed even further to truly challenge him. With that, she activates her special technique, which amplifies her speed to 3 times her normal pace. Even with this considerable increase in speed, Rick perceives her movements as still quite slow. He can track her every move with ease, and her enhanced speed doesn't make her much harder to dodge. Recognizing that he has the upper hand in this regard, Rick decides to be cautious rather than overconfident. He refrains from attacking recklessly, understanding that Angelica might have hidden skills or tricks that could surprise him. So he focuses on carefully evading her attacks, remaining vigilant and prepared for any unexpected moves she might make. Angelica is left completely dumbfounded as she sees Rick effortlessly keep up with her despite her rapid movements. She understands that she can only use her speed-enhancing technique a few more times before she runs out of stamina, so she decides to give it everything she has for a final desperate attempt to take Rick down. With all her might, she charges at him, hoping to overwhelm him with her speed. But just like before, she trips on an uneven patch of ground. As she stumbles, Rick seizes the moment and throws a powerful punch aimed at intercepting her. The impact of his punch is so tremendous that it blows a massive hole in the ground where his fist lands. Angelica sees the gaping hole and realizes with chilling clarity how close she came to being severely injured or even killed by such a powerful strike. Overcome with fear and awe, she stares at Rick, her confidence shattered, and questions who he really is. She struggles to process the sheer level of strength he has demonstrated and is left in a state of disbelief and trepidation. Rick calmly explains that he's just a former receptionist who decided to become an adventurer. Even though he is eager to keep fighting and continues to climb out of the hole to face Angelica once more, Angelica's demeanor shifts from confident to panicked. Seeing the raw power Rick has demonstrated and realizing the danger she's in, she quickly decides that it's best to surrender before things escalate any further. Terrified of the possibility of getting seriously hurt or even killed, Angelica raises her hands in defeat and calls off the fight. Her earlier bravado is replaced with a mix of relief and fear as she acknowledges Rick's overwhelming strength and makes it clear that she no longer wishes to continue the duel. Rick stands there, confused and unsure why Angelica suddenly decides to give up. Her surrender means he automatically wins the duel, and he remembers the penalty she set. She must serve him for the rest of her life. Realizing she completely forgot about this rule, Angelica is struck by panic. She can't think of any other option but to run away, so she quickly makes her escape, hoping to avoid the consequences of her own challenge. Rick, on the other hand, isn't particularly interested in enforcing the penalty. He doesn't chase after her and instead focuses on the more pressing matter at hand, the results of the exam. He feels a mix of anticipation and nervousness as he heads back to find out if his performance has been enough to pass. With the exam results about to be announced, Rick's mind races through all his efforts and the challenges he faced, hoping that everything he's done will be enough to secure a successful outcome and that his hard work will pay off. At this moment, Reinette informs Rick that his mentors will be arriving soon to check on him, which immediately causes him to panic. He knows from past experiences that their presence usually means trouble and stress. Despite his growing anxiety, Rick and Reinette head back to the exam center. Once there, they learn that the results of the exams will be revealed shortly through their exam tickets. Each ticket has a special feature. If a candidate passes, the ticket will glow blue, signaling their success and allowing them to advance to the next stage of the exams. However, if the ticket does not glow, it means the candidate has failed and will not move forward. As Rick waits for the results, he feels a mix of nervousness and hope, wondering if his efforts will be enough to turn his ticket blue and help him continue on his path. Rick is really worried that he might have failed the exam, so Reinette tries to reassure him that he did well on the exam. Rick thinks Reinette is nice for trying to make him feel better, and if he were 10 years younger, he would totally marry her. But she also has her scary side as she threatens to triple his training if he somehow manages to fail. Just then, Rick's card begins to glow, so he picks it up in anticipation, and he is elated to discover that he has successfully passed the first exam. He leaves the hall with Reinette, but as he steps outside, a dreadful stench fills his nostrils. He looks over and sees this rich dude walking straight up to Reinette, and he immediately introduces himself as the eldest son of the Diremute family, Raster Diremute. Rick has had to deal with 2 Diremute family members already, but this time Raster isn't here for Rick. He's here to shoot his shot with Reinette. Rick tries to introduce himself to Raster, but Raster wants nothing to do with a muscular middle-aged man, so he goes back to talking to Reinette and tells her that he is deeply in love with her he meant to say personality, and wants Reinette to come with him so that she can become his second wife. This is where Rick draws the line since he can't lose Reinette to someone like Raster, so he steps in front of Reinette and says she is his girlfriend, so Raster has no right to shoot his shot anymore. Raster looks down and notices that Rick is holding an exam card, which means he must still be F rank, and he finds it hilarious that someone as old as Rick is still at the lowest rank. Rick tries to defend himself by saying Raster is a little too old to be taking the exam, as well since he looks like he's at least 25. But Raster just laughs and tells Rick that he isn't here as an examinee. He already passed this test back when he was 14, so he's actually an A-rank adventurer, and he is here as an instructor for the second part of the exam. Believing he has asserted dominance over Rick, Raster turns back to Reinette and asks her if she would like to join him for dinner. But Rhett shuts him down and says the only man she'll go with is Rick, especially with the ungodly amount of perfume Raster sprayed on himself. Raster is enraged and can't accept that he won't be getting Rhett to go with him, so he swears that if he ends up in charge of Rick's exam, he will make sure Rick suffers as much as possible, and that is definitely going to make Reinette love him instead totally. After Raster walks off, Rick prays that he doesn't have to deal with him during the exam, but then he notices that Reinette is still clinging on to him, so he jumps back in embarrassment. He apologizes to Rhett for calling her his girlfriend all of a sudden, but Rhett says he doesn't need to be sorry about it since he did it to get rid of Raster, and it made her really happy. Meanwhile, Raster is seething with rage and frustration. He can't believe that not only did he fail to win Reinette's favor to become his second wife, but she also ended up with a middle-aged man, which feels like a huge personal insult. Just then, his younger siblings, Fried and Angelica, come rushing over at him, their faces filled with anger and distress. Fried, with a look of indignation, recounts how this old man harassed him during the exam. He feels wronged and unfairly treated, claiming that the old man's actions were completely out of line. Angelica, equally upset, chimes in with her own grievances. She explains how the same old man defeated her in a duel, and despite being the one who challenged him, he then tried to force her into servitude as part of the penalty. The way Fried and Angelica tell their stories makes it seem like they were the victims of serious injustice. Raster listens to their accounts with mounting fury, convinced that the old man has gone too far. He is enraged by the idea that someone would dare to humiliate his family in such a disgraceful manner, and feels a deep, burning sense of injustice and anger at how his family members were treated. When Raster finds out that the person who caused all this trouble is Rick, he suddenly feels a twisted sense of satisfaction. The thought of having a chance for revenge makes him smile wickedly, seeing this as the perfect opportunity to settle the score. Meanwhile, the mock battles are about to start, and Rick is feeling incredibly anxious. Rena, noticing his nervousness, advises him to make sure he holds back during the exam. She explains that even though Rick might feel confident, it's important to be cautious and not reveal his full strength. However, Rick still struggles to grasp this advice. He thinks that given his own doubts about his abilities, he shouldn't need to hold back against opponents who are likely stronger than him. Despite Rena's guidance, Rick remains uncertain about why he should restrain himself when he feels he's still not strong enough to make a significant impact. Rick is still anxious about the prospect of Raster being in charge of his test, worried about the possible trouble and unfair treatment he might face. At that moment, Rick and Renette encounter a man named Lynx, who introduces himself as the one responsible for overseeing Rick's upcoming exam. This news brings a huge sense of relief to Rick, and he can't help but start celebrating internally because it means Raster will not be the one evaluating him after all. Lynx then mentions that he is surprised to see someone of Rick's age switching careers to become an adventurer, which is not something he sees every day. Despite this initial surprise, Lynx assures Rick that he doesn't view his decision as a bad one. In fact, Lynx finds Rick's determination to pursue his dreams at this stage of his life quite inspiring. He points out that their similar ages give him a unique perspective on Rick's situation, and he respects Rick's courage and commitment to follow his aspirations despite the challenges and potential obstacles he might face. Lynx, who began his journey as an adventurer when he was 24 years old, has spent the past 20 years striving to reach B rank. Despite his dedication and hard work, he knows that achieving his ultimate goal requires him to climb up to A rank. Observing Rick's commitment and perseverance has given Lynx a renewed sense of motivation to push himself further and work harder toward his own aspirations. He is enthusiastic about the upcoming mock battle and is eager to test Rick's abilities, though he warns that he will be putting in his full effort and won't go easy on him. This excites Lynx as he sees Rick's drive as a source of inspiration. At the same time, lurking around the corner is Raster, who is scheming with a devious intent. As Rick and Lynx part ways, Lynx descends a dark, winding stairwell. Suddenly, Raster appears from the shadows behind him, confronting Lynx with a proposal that carries an underlying threat. Raster's approach is both a proposition and a veiled intimidation, indicating that he has a manipulative plan in mind that could influence or undermine Lynx's role in the upcoming events. This unexpected encounter raises the tension, hinting at potential trouble that Raster might bring into the mix. Rick and Renette are waiting in the locker room, and Rick seems to be in a much better mood than he was earlier, and it's all because he got Lynx as his instructor. However, a moment later, someone comes in to announce that Lynx has mysteriously fallen ill, so he won't be able to act as an instructor anymore. In his place, Raster has been assigned to take over Rick's exam, and Rick starts freaking out. Renette mentions that Raster must have pulled some illegal strings to get this to happen, and since he is related to Angelica and Freed, he may be holding a grudge against Rick. The other examinees in the room begin talking about how terrible it is to have Raster as your instructor for the exam. And while he may be a dignified member of the Daru family, he is also known for how much he enjoys beating up F-rank adventurers. Every single year he picks a particular adventurer to mess with and does everything in his power to make them fail, which is bad news for Rick since Raster definitely hates his guts right now. Later, as Raster is outside tormenting a random examinee, he fires a barrage of ice blasts and knocks the guy out. But just as he was insulting the examinee for being weak, his fun gets interrupted as he receives a message from the elite guard. Meanwhile, Rick is pacing around inside as it is soon going to be his turn, and he doesn't know how he is going to handle Raster. Renette is baffled by Rick's intense worry about the upcoming match. She tries to reassure him, pointing out that all he needs to do is beat Raster. Rick, however, is consumed by anxiety because he views Raster as a highly respected A-rank adventurer, whereas he himself is only at F-rank. The thought of facing Raster fills him with dread, as he genuinely fears that such a confrontation could lead to his downfall. Adding to his stress is the knowledge that if he backs out of the fight, he will be subjected to a grueling 3 times his usual training routine. This prospect alone is almost as frightening as facing Raster. Renette, noticing Rick's distress, steps in front of him and questions whether he truly lacks confidence in his own skills. Rick, with a heavy heart, admits that he feels inadequate as an adventurer. He explains that starting this career later in life has been a major obstacle for him. Throughout his journey, he's been constantly reminded that he's too old to pursue this path. These comments have deeply impacted his self-esteem, making him doubt his own abilities and worthiness for the role of an adventurer. Renette reassures Rick, emphasizing that he shouldn't let the negative opinions of others undermine his confidence. She tells him that what truly matters is that she believes in his abilities, and even if he struggles to believe in himself, he should trust her judgment. She insists that she genuinely thinks he has what it takes to succeed. Rick, deeply moved by her encouragement, starts to feel a renewed sense of confidence. Just then, a boy dressed in a cloak approaches Rick and offers to do a free fortune-telling for him. The boy assures Rick that there's nothing dubious about it, even though the whole situation seems quite suspicious. Despite his reservations and the oddness of the offer, Rick decides to take a chance and go along with the fortune-telling, hoping it might provide some useful insights or reassurance before his big challenge. Just as Rick is about to sit down in the chair that the cloaked boy has prepared for him, Renette's sharp eyes catch sight of a glowing magic circle etched into the seat. She immediately tries to warn Rick, her voice filled with alarm as she realizes that it's a trap. But before she can get to him in time, the magic circle activates, and Rick is abruptly and magically whisked away to an unknown location, leaving Renette helplessly watching. After Rick vanishes, the boy, now revealed to be Freed, proudly removes his cloak with a smirk of satisfaction. Freed feels a sense of triumph, believing he has successfully outsmarted Rick and set his plan into motion. However, Freed's sense of victory is short-lived. He fails to consider that Renette, who is fiercely protective of Rick, would not take kindly to such treachery. In her anger, Renette grabs Freed by the collar and, with an intense burst of power, blasts a large hole through the wall. The explosion from Renette's outburst reverberates with the intensity of her rage, leaving Freed both shocked and terrified as everything around him begins to fall apart. Renette demands to know where Rick has been sent, but Freed stubbornly refuses to give up the information. In response to her threats, including a rather unpleasant eyelash trim and a menacing approach involving potential eye poking, Freed finally cracks under pressure. He reveals that his teleportation spell can only transport someone a maximum of 100 meters away, meaning Rick is still somewhere nearby. Meanwhile, Rick finds himself suddenly appearing by a river that runs behind the training center, completely baffled about how he ended up there. As he is trying to piece together what happened, a group of elite guards appears before him. They inform Rick, much to his dismay, that they have been given orders to beat him up. Realizing that these guards are part of the elite force from the Daru family, Rick quickly connects the dots and understands that Raster and his allies must be behind this unexpected attack. They don't want Raster to get his hands dirty, so they'll make it so that Rick won't be able to participate in the exam. Rick calls them shameless for trying to stall him so he misses his exam, but the leader corrects him and says this is a coordinated jumping among the elite guard. They have B and A rank adventurers, though Rick feels like he is utterly outmatched. As he is contemplating what to do, he notices some people standing on the ledge nearby, and upon taking a closer look, he realizes that they are the senior members of his party, and they scare him more than the elite guard. Rick's party members leap down from above, visibly concerned about why he is by the river instead of preparing for his important exam. In an effort to protect the elite guards from harm, Rick quickly fabricates a story, saying that the guards were only trying to help him get ready. Ralston, always enthusiastic about any kind of training, expresses his willingness to join in, unaware of how grueling training with him can be. Rick urgently tries to warn the leader of the elite guards that they should leave before they get themselves into serious trouble. Despite Rick's warnings, the leader scoffs at him and orders his team to eliminate Browston. As one of the elite guards steps forward and swings a sword aimed at Browston's head, the sword breaks into pieces upon hitting Browston. Standing there with a stony expression, Browston remains completely unaffected by the shattered weapon, revealing his unwavering strength and resilience. He commends the guy for strengthening his body well, but he is disappointed that he failed to strengthen his weapon enough so that it wouldn't break. The guy gets angry and decides to use his fists instead, but that goes about as well as you would expect since Browston just grabs his hand and squishes it until it turns purple. However, Browston tells him that he doesn't need to worry since he has healing magic to restore his mangled hand to normal. The leader of the elite guard is beginning to understand that he might have made a serious mistake by attacking Rick and his party. He starts to realize just how powerful these people are. Meanwhile, Mazette approaches Rick and asks if the elite guards are really trying to start a fight with him. Rick confirms that they are. Mazette then decides to handle the situation in what he calls a peaceful way. He pulls out a high-tech superfire barrel anicaps, 3 rifle and shoots at all the guards within range, leaving them sprawled and unconscious on the ground. Rick shouts at Mazette for claiming he would resolve things peacefully, but instead causing such chaos. Mazette calmly insists that none of them are dead yet, although it's likely they're very badly hurt. One of the guards, desperate to gain control, tries to grab Alice as a hostage. He doesn't realize how great his mistake is. Even Browston warns him to back away slowly if he wants to avoid death. Ignoring the warning, the guard hits Alice to silence her. This proves to be a fatal error, as Alice responds by using her powers to vaporize him instantly, showing just how dangerous it is to threaten her. The other members of the elite guard are in shock and disbelief as they try to process the overwhelming display of power before them. The leader, now fully understanding the gravity of the situation, realizes that they are up against a group of extraordinary individuals. He urgently explains to his team that the girl they attempted to intimidate is not just any child. She is Alice Ceredrol, a vampire with prodigious magical abilities. Despite her tender age of only 10, she is already known as the strongest mage in the world. Mazette, who had used the high-tech rifle, is a dwarf with a remarkable talent for crafting groundbreaking technology that is unlike anything seen before. Browston, the orc who remained unfazed by the earlier attacks, possesses incredible strength and profound wisdom. All 3 are not just talented, they are S-rank adventurers, a rank that denotes their capabilities are far beyond what anyone could reasonably expect. On top of that, they are part of Orculum Fist, a prestigious party that consists entirely of S-rank adventurers. This team is renowned for their exceptional strength and skill, making them an almost invincible force in the world of adventurers. The leader of the elite guard, having been utterly shocked by the astonishing power of Rick's companions, makes a swift and wise decision to resign immediately from his position, fearing for his life. Realizing the danger of continuing, he chooses to walk away from the confrontation. Meanwhile, the remaining members of the elite guard who decide to stay are left to contend with Alice, who is now dealing with them in a manner that makes Rick try his best to ignore the agonized cries and the chaos unfolding. Instead, he focuses all his energy and attention on the crucial exam that he must complete. After managing to return to Reinette, who has taken care of Freed, Rick comes across Lynx, who is in a terrible state. Lynx has been badly beaten by Raster. Earlier, Raster had cornered Lynx and, in a brutal display of arrogance, asked him what his dream was. Lynx, with hope and sincerity, had expressed his wish to build a school for the children in his village. However, Raster, showing nothing but disdain, had dismissed Lynx's dream with a cruel, "Screw those kids," before unleashing a vicious assault on him. This cruel act was all part of Raster's plan to get to Rick. Upon learning about this, Rick's initial fear is replaced by an intense fury and determination. He is no longer just anxious about facing Raster. He is now fueled by a deep-seated rage and resolve. Rick is more motivated than ever to confront Raster and make him pay for his brutality, channeling all his energy into ensuring that justice is served and Raster is held accountable for his actions. Before diving back into the main action, we are introduced to Adolf, who explains the 4 core aspects of power in this world: strength, dexterity, magic capacity, and magic control. Adolf has a unique gift that allows him to gauge a person's power just by looking at them. To show us how it works, he picks a random person from the crowd and assesses him, finding that this individual is extremely weak. Predictably, such a weak candidate is quickly defeated by Raster, who is known for his immense strength. Raster's power is primarily focused on his mana capacity, making him a formidable opponent. Adolf finds it quite taxing to look at such strong individuals, and when he turns his gaze to Rick, the strain is so intense that Adolf actually loses his sight momentarily. Meanwhile, in the stands, Rick's former co-worker approaches Reinette. She introduces herself as Elisa Granger and mentions that she had seen Rick with Reinette the day before. When Reinette introduces Elisa as part of Rick's party, Elisa's face lights up with joy. She is thrilled to hear that Rick has made new friends and is surrounded by people who support him. As the crowd gets ready for Rick's upcoming test, Reinette extends an invitation for Elisa to join them. Elisa gratefully accepts and heads towards the seats, but she is momentarily stunned when she notices Browston and Work sitting among the group. The sight is unusual and surprising to her. Meanwhile, Mazette spots Rena and invites her to sit next to him. Rena, however, politely refuses, well aware that Mazette has a reputation for being a bit too forward and annoying when it comes to social interactions. Mazette's attention then shifts to the girl standing behind Renette. Curiosity piqued, he asks who she is. Renette introduces her as Elisa Granger, Rick's former coworker, and Elisa greets everyone with a warm smile. Mazette, impressed by Elisa's charismatic presence and vibrant personality, eagerly offers her the seat next to him. Renette, however, is quick to step in and ensure that Elisa doesn't fall victim to Mazette's less than desirable advances. Just then, Rick makes his appearance in the arena, capturing everyone's focus and signaling the start of the event. Renette asks her how she thinks Rick will do in the exam. She confidently says Rick will pass the exam without incident, but Elisa doesn't think it'll be that easy. Elisa tells Renette that Raster is an A-rank adventurer who has a notorious reputation for using excessive force against E-rank adventurers. This reputation is part of what makes Raster feared. However, Broston is confident that Rick won't have much trouble facing Raster, especially since he's been training hard and has shown impressive skills. As the match is about to start, Angelica and a visibly hurt Freed are on the sidelines, cheering for Raster, hoping he will give Rick a tough time and teach him a lesson. Raster himself is determined to do just that. Although he is puzzled about how Rick managed to avoid the earlier attackers who were sent to beat him up, Raster dismisses them as weak compared to his own strength. Rick, curious about Raster's motivations, asks him why he chose to become an adventurer. Raster reveals that his main reason was for the status and the perks that come with it. He enjoys having a high rank because it allows him to intimidate and beat up newcomers for his own amusement without putting himself at real risk. With his high rank, he can always show his adventurer card to assert his authority and keep anyone questioning him at bay. If his reasons are truly so shallow, then Rick says he refuses to lose to him no matter what. Raster begins by firing a level 1 ice spell at Rick, and he intentionally misses. But Rick didn't move an inch. He mocks Rick for being frozen in fear. But the real reason Rick is standing still is because Renette had advised him to use the first minute of the battle to calm himself and observe Raster's movements. Raster prepares to launch a serious attack on Rick, so he quickly casts a level 3 fire spell aimed directly at him. Rick is taken aback by how fast Raster can cast such a powerful spell, but he decides to stay focused and watch rather than dodge. The fire blast strikes Rick head-on, causing Elisa to gasp in worry for his safety. To everyone's surprise, Rick emerges completely unharmed. Broston, observing from the sidelines, reassures Elisa that Rick is strong enough to handle an attack like that without any trouble. He explains that Rick's resilience comes from his training and natural ability. Broston elaborates that among the 4 core powers, strength, dexterity, magic capacity, and magic control, mana capacity is crucial and needs to be developed from a young age. If someone doesn't train their mana capacity early on, they miss out on growing in this area, which typically has a maximum limit of around 20. Since Rick began his adventuring career at the age of 30, his mana capacity, which is crucial for casting spells and magical defense, is notably low compared to those who have been training from a younger age. Recognizing this limitation, Rick has invested significant effort into improving other aspects of his abilities. For his physical strength, Broston subjected him to extreme training regimens. Rick endured challenging exercises like running between villages while strapped with 900 kilograms ankle weights, all while being chased by venomous snakes through dense forests. These grueling workouts were designed to push Rick's physical endurance and strength to the maximum. In addition to Broston's intense physical training, Rick also receives crucial instruction in mana control from Mazette. Mazette, who is typically known for avoiding hard work, surprises everyone by committing to train Rick despite his usual reluctance. This commitment is significant because Mazette understands that mastering mana control is essential for Rick to develop strong magical defenses. Without Mazette's dedicated training, Rick would be highly vulnerable to magical attacks and might have been easily defeated or even killed by now. Mazette's unusual dedication to Rick's training is a key factor in preparing him to handle formidable opponents and challenging situations. Furthermore, Broston explains that Renette, who Rick also trained with, was responsible for improving Rick's dexterity. This revelation shocks Elisa, who had previously thought Renette was merely a maid, not someone with such impressive training skills. However, Broston clarifies that Renette simply enjoys wearing maid outfits for fun, which is just a personal preference and not related to her skills. Renette's role in Rick's training has been vital, contributing significantly to his overall development and readiness for the trials he faces. Rick has poured his heart and soul into the intense training he received, and though he doesn't fully grasp it, he has achieved the strength of an S-rank adventurer. This is partly because Broston constantly downplayed his abilities, making him believe that E-rank adventurers were far stronger than he could ever be. As Raster prepares to cast another spell, he starts mocking Rick and Lynx, making derogatory comments about their age and their place in the adventurer world. Raster then unleashes every elemental attack he knows, launching a barrage of powerful spells at Rick. When Raster finishes his relentless assault, he assumes that Rick must either be dead or severely injured. However, to Raster's shock and dismay and the horror of his siblings, Rick emerges from the attack completely unharmed, with not a scratch on him. Frustrated and increasingly irate at Rick's incredible resilience, Raster decides to take matters into his own hands and finish Rick off using only his physical strength. Raster casts a spell to enhance his hands and feet, then charges at Rick with the intention of landing a devastating blow. As Raster throws a powerful punch, Rick calmly counters with a punch of his own, sending Raster reeling backward with surprising force. This turn of events highlights the impact of Renet's guidance. Rick's careful observation and strategic approach have clearly paid off. Despite Raster's larger mana capacity, which should theoretically give him an edge, Rick realizes that this is his sole advantage. Raster has never put in the effort to refine his abilities or truly develop his skills. As a result, Rick understands that, at this moment, he is stronger than Raster, despite Raster's greater potential. Raster, unwilling to accept this, tries to pass off Rick's successful counterpunch as a mere fluke. Determined to prove himself, Raster decides to escalate the fight by casting a full incantation spell, hoping to overpower Rick. The spell, with its complex and dramatic display, appears formidable and impressive. However, Rick effortlessly blocks the spell with one hand, demonstrating his superior control and strength. With a smirk, Rick taunts Raster, criticizing the sloppy execution of his spell and making it clear that Raster's efforts fall short against his own abilities. Elisa is completely stunned by Rick's ability to block a spell that should be well beyond his apparent mana capacity. Mazette quickly steps in to explain the situation, saying that Rick has become incredibly skilled at managing his mana usage. Although Raster boasts a much larger mana reserve, Rick has honed his control so effectively that he can use only a tiny fraction, 100,000 times less, of the mana needed to match Raster's powerful spell. This insight deeply unsettles Raster, who is beginning to realize that Rick is far more formidable than he initially thought. In a desperate attempt to salvage his pride, Raster launches one final attack, aiming to show that he is indeed stronger. Yet Rick's superior speed allows him to dodge and counter effortlessly, landing a punch that forces Raster to activate his Iron Body defense magic. By now, Raster acknowledges that Rick is exhibiting strength far beyond that of an ordinary E-rank adventurer. Despite this realization, Raster still tries to convince himself and others that Rick's successes so far have been merely due to luck. Rick, however, is not deceived by Raster's attempts to undermine his achievements and remains resolute, understanding his own power and refusing to fall for Raster's attempts at manipulation. He knows that everything up till now has been a result of his strength, and on top of that, Rick hasn't even used any strengthening magic yet. He was able to overpower Raster after Raster used it to attack. Raster realizes he can't bluff his way out of this, so he asks Rick how he managed to become so strong when he possesses very little mana. But Rick feels insulted that Raster thinks he used some cheap trick. He was thrown into a dragon's lair and wasn't allowed to leave until he defeated it. He got blasted over and over with extremely powerful explosions, and then he was forced to swim through a swamp of monster goo until he choked on it. Elisa can't believe Rick survived all that, but in reality, Rick didn't survive. But since Broston's healing magic is so powerful, as long as it is applied quickly, no matter how many times Rick ends up dying, they always bring him back to life. That's how he managed to exceed his physical limitations, and it is honestly surprising how well Rick handled it since none of them had any regard for his safety. So if Broston pushed him off a cliff for training and he died, they just called Broston to heal him. The same thing happened with Elisa's training and Renet's training, leading to several life-ending injuries. Raster doesn't believe any of it though, since even if there was a way for Rick to train like that, what reason would he have to willingly put himself through hell like that? Rick says he has a dream of eventually killing the world's strongest monster, Kaiser Alcipaet. Raster begins laughing at Rick because he thinks the monster is nothing more than an old story. But in truth, the monster is very real, and the main goal of the Orculum party is to one day eliminate it. Raster doesn't believe the monster exists and calls Rick dumb for believing in a children's story. But Rick doesn't care if Raster doesn't believe him, since his mission has nothing to do with him. Raster is tired of listening to Rick's stories, so he says he will now end this fight once and for all and uses a level 7 binding spell to hold Rick in place. He then begins the chant for the strongest spell he has available, the level 8 Idris Elvine Mech. With this, Raster believes the fight has been won since there's no way Rick would be able to overpower a spell this powerful. However, Rick begins charging up a level 1 air shot to fight back. Raster laughs at him and says a mere level 1 spell could never be his level 8 spell, yet Rick is still completely confident that his air shot will be enough to punch through Raster's Vine Mech, and that's because Raster has used this spell a handful of times at most, so he hasn't refined it to its utmost capabilities. On the other hand, Rick has used his air shot over 100 million times already, so he has learned how to unleash its full potential. No one believes Rick's claim of using the spell 100 million times since it is physically impossible to have done that in only 2 years, but Broston assures Elisa that Rick is telling the truth, although he needed space-time magic to make it possible. Raster still doesn't believe it though, so he gets ready to smash Rick into the ground and finish this. But as he gets ready to punch, Rick effortlessly snaps the binds on his arms and legs and clashes with Raster. Raster is certain that he has won now that he has landed his attack, but then his mech starts crumbling from Rick's power before finally being shattered to pieces and sending Raster flying off into the stands. He is still alive, but his pride definitely isn't. Hardly anyone can believe what they just saw, as an E-rank adventurer just defeated an A-rank. Although Rick's friends totally expected this outcome. After Rick returns to the locker room, the others go to meet him and congratulate him on winning his fight, especially Elisa, who is really impressed by how strong he has gotten. Rick finally understands that he is really strong, and he doesn't know why he didn't realize it sooner, but he thanks his friends for training him so well. They tell him there's no need to thank them so formally, and instead, they should all go out to celebrate at a bar. But before that, Rick hears the voices of Raster and his siblings entering the room, and Raster is clearly feeling the pain from Rick's punch, but he refuses to get treated for it. As Rick sees him, he starts telling Raster that there's a reason he lost the match today. Raster doesn't want to hear any mockery from Rick, but Rick is trying to give him some genuine advice. Rick shares with Raster that throughout his training, he made a conscious choice to concentrate on a few techniques, dedicating himself to mastering each one completely. He explains that based on his experience, if Raster truly wants to enhance his strength, he should focus intensely on perfecting just one technique, even to the point of pushing himself to his limits. However, Rick reassures Raster that this is merely advice and he is free to take it or leave it as he sees fit. Rick's belief in Raster's potential is evident as he expresses his high hopes for Raster's future success as an adventurer. It appears that Raster has absorbed some of Rick's wisdom and is showing signs of humility. With a silent but respectful acknowledgement, Raster walks past Rick and makes a promise. When Rick faces his next promotion exam, Raster will ensure he is strong enough to pass and avoid another failure. This gesture signifies Raster's newfound respect and commitment to improving himself in accordance with Rick's advice. Once Raster and his siblings depart, Angelica approaches Rick with a sincere expression and bows her head, apologizing for the trouble and difficulty she brought upon him. She offers her help to assist Raster in leaving, demonstrating her genuine remorse and respect. As the E-rank exams draw to a close, an announcement is made to reveal the names of those who have passed. Rick, filled with anticipation, listens closely for his name while his friends and companions eagerly prepare a celebratory feast, convinced of his success. When the announcement confirms that Rick has indeed passed the exam, he appears unusually composed and serene. This calm demeanor surprises Ren, who had expected him to be more visibly excited or relieved. The reason for Rick's calmness is the myriad of thoughts occupying his mind. He is lost in deep reflection, reminiscing about a childhood memory. He recalls reading a book about a heroic figure who embarked on an epic quest to battle the formidable monster Kaiser Alcipaeat in pursuit of the legendary Akashic records. This memory evokes a profound sense of nostalgia and introspection within Rick, prompting him to think about his own path and the trials that await him on his journey. As Rick reflects on his past and dreams for the future, he finds himself in a deep moment of contemplation. The memories of the hero who set out to defeat the monstrous Kaiser Alcipaeat and find the Akashic records weigh heavily on his mind. Although this hero ultimately failed in his quest, leaving the Akashic records for future adventurers to discover, it was this very story that inspired Rick to pursue a path as an adventurer. He recalls how this book sparked his desire to follow in the footsteps of such a daring hero. However, Rick's journey was not without its challenges, particularly at home. His mother, although supportive, was understandably anxious about his choice to become an adventurer due to the inherent dangers of the profession. She gently suggested that Rick consider a safer career to ease her worries. On the other hand, his father's reaction was much more severe. He was firmly against Rick's decision and insisted that Rick should focus on finding a stable, conventional job instead of risking his life as an adventurer. This contrast in their responses added to Rick's resolve, but also made him aware of the weight and consequences of his chosen path. After a routine checkup one day, Rick's physician delivers some surprising news. Rick possesses an innate skill. Rick is stunned because innate skills are incredibly rare and coveted, making him almost like Yamato, the legendary hero he admired. The doctor explains that while having an innate skill is extraordinary, it's not something that can be instantly harnessed through sheer effort alone. Developing and fully using this skill will take time and patience. Despite this, Rick is overjoyed. This news feels like a major step toward achieving his dream of proving himself as a successful adventurer, especially to his parents who have been skeptical of his chosen path. The recognition of his rare talent brings him a sense of accomplishment and hope for the future. The next day, Rick wakes up with renewed excitement and eagerly tells his friends about the innate skill he has been granted. He shares his high hopes, convinced that once he can harness this ability, it will be truly amazing and set him apart. However, as time progresses, the initial thrill fades as days turn into weeks, and weeks into months. Rick faces the tough truth that his innate skill might never actually manifest. His friends, understanding and supportive, encourage him to continue pursuing his dream of becoming an adventurer, even without the innate skill, since many successful adventurers don't possess such abilities. They remind him that being an adventurer offers great financial rewards and a rewarding career. Despite this, Rick's true drive to become an adventurer was never about the money. It was about becoming like his idol, the hero Yamato. Since he can't realize his vision of being the kind of adventurer he always wanted to be, Rick decides that it's time to accept reality and explore other career options. He resolves to look for a traditional job, accepting that his dream of becoming a hero like Yamato may not come to fruition, but hopeful that he can find fulfillment elsewhere. Rick sits down with his parents and shares his decision to set aside his dream of becoming an adventurer to pursue a more conventional job instead. Their reaction is one of overwhelming joy, as they are relieved and pleased that Rick has chosen a stable, predictable path over the uncertain life of an adventurer. They view his decision as a sign of maturity and practicality. The years that follow see Rick navigating the ins and outs of his new role as a receptionist, a job that initially feels far removed from the excitement of adventuring. As he goes about his daily tasks, he watches countless adventurers come and go, living out the dreams he once held close. This constant reminder of what he once aspired to be starts to take its toll, and Rick gradually becomes more disenchanted with the gap between his reality and his earlier aspirations. Despite this growing sense of disillusionment, he eventually comes to terms with his situation, finding a new sense of fulfillment in the simpler pleasures of life and the time spent with his friends and family. One day, as he is sifting through old books and memories, he comes across the storybook that once fueled his dreams, an account of Yamato's legendary adventures. As he flips through the pages, he is struck by how distant and unreal those stories now seem, reduced to a mere fairy tale. The book, once a symbol of his dreams, now serves as a nostalgic reminder of the aspirations he had and the journey he undertook to reconcile his dreams with his reality. The next morning, Rick arrives at work to find that Elisa, who has just been hired recently, is struggling to keep up with the large amount of paperwork piling up on her desk. Noticing her frustration, Rick approaches her and offers to help out. He gently reminds her that it's okay to take her time to learn the ropes and get used to the job, as everyone needs time to adjust and become proficient. He reassures her that with a bit of patience and practice, she will get the hang of it soon enough. Additionally, Rick shares some important information with Elisa, noting that he has observed an increase in monster activity around town. He explains that this uptick in monster presence is likely to lead to a quest soon, aimed at dealing with the creatures. Elisa is thankful for the heads up, as it gives her the chance to prepare the necessary forms and documents ahead of time, making the process smoother when the quest officially comes up. As Elisa heads off to get the paperwork in order, Rick's friend Zaid, who is an adventurer and someone Rick has known for a while, walks in. Zaid seems excited and has something intriguing to show Rick, sparking Rick's curiosity about what news or items Zaid might be bringing. Zaid has just returned from his promotion exam and excitedly announces that he has been officially promoted to B-rank adventurer. Rick is truly happy for Zaid and shares in his friend's joy, but he also feels a sharp pang of jealousy. Watching Zaid achieve what Rick had once dreamed of for himself is hard to bear. To deal with his feelings, Rick decides to drown his sorrows in alcohol, hoping it will ease the pain of his envy and disappointment. Even though he is drunk, the difference between his life and Zaid's is glaringly obvious. Zaid has reached his goal and is now a B-rank adventurer, living out the life Rick had always wanted. Meanwhile, Rick has spent 14 years in the same job, with nothing but a stable income and modest pay raises to show for it. The contrast between their situations deepens Rick's sense of regret and makes him feel even more disheartened about his own unfulfilled dreams. Meanwhile, Rick reflects on the past 14 years of his life, spent working the same job with nothing much to show for it except a steady income and a few modest raises. This stark contrast between his life and Zaid's only serves to deepen Rick's feelings of regret and frustration. Although he doesn't think he has completely wasted his life, he can't help but wonder how different his path might have been if he had pursued his dream of becoming an adventurer. As he grapples with these thoughts, a commotion breaks out in the middle of town, catching Rick's attention. Driven by a sense of responsibility and curiosity, he heads over to see if he can offer any help. However, what he encounters is far beyond what he anticipated. A mid-rank hand troll has somehow made its way into the city. This is a formidable creature that Rick would normally avoid at all costs. The sight of the massive, menacing troll fills him with dread, and he feels an overwhelming sense of fear and helplessness. In a situation where he would have previously fled, Rick now stands paralyzed, realizing that he lacks the necessary skills and training to confront such a dangerous threat. But then Rick notices a woman walking right into the path of the massive hand troll. Realizing he can't just stand by and let her get hurt, he rushes out in front of her, even though he knows he can't do much to stop the troll. As the giant monster draws closer, Rick braces himself for what he fears will be a brutal and certain death. Just as he prepares for the worst, Renette appears out of nowhere, stepping in front of Rick. With a swift and powerful strike, she slashes the monster into pieces, effectively ending the threat. After the battle, Renette turns to Rick with a smile and thanks him for trying to protect her. She reassures him that he doesn't need to worry about her safety, as she is a skilled adventurer capable of handling such dangers. Following this encounter, Rick and Renette walk together, exchanging introductions and getting to know each other better, with Rick feeling both relieved and grateful for her timely intervention. After the battle, Rick, still visibly impressed by Renette's extraordinary display of skill, tells her how amazed he is and asks if she happens to be a B-rank adventurer. Renette simply shakes her head, indicating that she is not a B rank. Rick, trying to guess her rank, then assumes she must be an A-rank adventurer, and his admiration grows even more because encountering an A-rank adventurer in town is a rare and noteworthy event. However, Renette corrects him again, saying that she is not an A-rank either. With a calm and collected demeanor, she pulls out her S-rank badge and shows it to Rick. The sight of the badge leaves Rick utterly stunned. S-rank adventurers are not only incredibly powerful, but also extremely rare, making this moment a significant and extraordinary experience for him. Rick has heard rumors that these top-tier adventurers are so highly regarded that they are often removed from local guild registers and have their missions directly overseen by the headquarters, adding to the rarity and prestige of meeting one. Rick is almost in disbelief that he is standing in front of such a legendary adventurer as Renette. With a mix of excitement and hesitation, he decides to ask her a rather unusual question, but he pleads with her not to laugh at him. Renette, with a reassuring smile, promises that she hasn't laughed even once in the 9 years since she turned 8, although Rick isn't sure if that's something to be proud of. Taking a deep breath, Rick shares with Renette his childhood dream of becoming an adventurer and one day defeating the formidable Kaiser Alcipiat. He then asks her if she thinks it's still possible for him to achieve this dream, even though he is already 30 years old and has spent most of his life in a different career. Seeing how Rick rushed in to protect her despite the danger, Renette is certain that he has the kind of bravery and courage needed for an adventurer. However, she emphasizes a critical aspect of adventuring that Rick needs to understand: mana reserves. Rick acknowledges that building mana reserves is incredibly difficult, particularly if it's not done during youth. Renette explains that for someone who hasn't developed their mana reserves from a young age, it's nearly impossible to build them up effectively later in life. Mana reserves are vital for an adventurer's strength and ability to handle various challenges. Given this reality, Renette feels she must be honest with Rick and gently explains that considering his current age and situation, it's highly unlikely he could become a successful adventurer if he starts now. This insight is delivered with a sense of sympathy, recognizing the difficulty of the dream Rick has cherished. Rick had a feeling that Renette's answer might be along those lines, but hearing it directly still stings. He finds a bit of solace knowing that an S-rank adventurer gave him this news, making it easier to accept that his dream of becoming an adventurer is beyond reach. With this new clarity, Rick resigns himself to giving up on his dreams and settling into a more ordinary life. Renette, sensing his disappointment, apologizes for any distress her words might have caused. Rick reassures her that he appreciates her honesty and is grateful for her straightforwardness. He also finds a silver lining in their encounter, noting that it's not every day he meets someone as impressive and attractive as her. In a lighthearted attempt to cheer himself up, he jokingly invites Renette to join him for a meal sometime. To his surprise, Renette accepts his invitation with genuine enthusiasm and suggests they meet for dinner the very next day. The following morning, Rick wakes up with an unusually bright and enthusiastic outlook, feeling a surge of motivation to tackle his work with renewed energy. His good mood remains intact throughout the day, even when Zaid strolls in, eagerly boasting about his recent promotion to B-rank adventurer. Despite the obvious pride Zaid is taking in his achievement, Rick remains unaffected by any pangs of jealousy. Instead, he offers Zaid heartfelt congratulations and wishes him nothing but success on his forthcoming quests. As the workday concludes, Rick finds himself skipping down the street with a light-hearted cheer, excited about his upcoming dinner date with Renette. He starts to dream of how the evening might unfold, hoping it could lead to something more significant, like the start of a new relationship. Just as he's approaching the meeting spot, his daydreams are abruptly shattered by the loud, frantic cries of people around him, shouting about a monster attack on the city. His heart sinks as he absorbs the gravity of the situation, realizing that the monster threat is likely to interfere with his well-planned date. Knowing that Renette was scheduled to meet him close by, Rick immediately assumes that she must already be engaged in fighting the monsters. Concerned for her safety and the potential danger she might be facing, he hurries off in the direction of the commotion, hoping to find Renette and offer any help he can. Although Renette seems to be handling the monster attack with impressive skill, dealing with the threat on her own, she notices that a large number of monsters are still approaching. She quickly turns to Rick and asks him to stay back while she takes care of the situation, and Rick, trusting her expertise, steps aside to let her do her work. In just a short amount of time, the area around them becomes littered with the remains of numerous monsters, and Renette appears unfazed as if she has barely broken a sweat. However, in a sudden and unexpected moment, Renette is struck by a powerful sense of fear and anguish that brings back haunting memories of losing everyone she once loved. The emotional weight of these traumatic memories overwhelms her, causing her to collapse to the ground in a state of distress. As Renette continues to struggle with her panic attack, a new monster emerges, advancing menacingly towards her. Rick, caught off guard and completely unprepared to defend her in the middle of this chaotic situation, feels utterly helpless as he watches the approaching threat. However, fortune is on their side as Zaid suddenly arrives on the scene, swooping in to confront the monster and effectively save both Rick and Renette from immediate danger. Rick is immensely thankful for Zaid's timely intervention, though he's left wondering why his friend is here at all. Just then, 2 additional adventurers arrive, ready to assist. Zaid explains that the guild issued an emergency quest in response to the sudden influx of monsters, prompting him and the others to rush to the area to provide aid. With the situation beginning to stabilize, Zaid urges Rick to quickly get Renette to a safe place while he and the other adventurers handle the remaining monsters, ensuring their safety and resolving the crisis. While the adventurers continue their fierce battle against the monsters, Rick is struck by the realization that his feelings of jealousy towards them are as strong as ever. As Renette starts to regain her composure from the earlier panic, she urgently warns Rick about the dangers of staying in the area. Rick tries to comfort her, believing that the B-rank adventurers will be able to handle the remaining monsters, but Renette insists that they won't be strong enough for what's coming next. She reveals that a dragon is nearby and explains that her past trauma prevents her from fighting dragons. Whenever she senses a dragon, the magic within her becomes uncontrollable, making her unable to fight effectively. Although Rick is skeptical about the presence of a dragon so close to a human town, his doubts are immediately dispelled when he sees something massive flying overhead. As he looks up, he spots the dragon Renette had warned about. The sight is both shocking and terrifying, as it seems almost impossible for a dragon to appear in such an unexpected place. According to the guild's guidelines, any adventurer lower than A rank who encounters a dragon should simply stay still and hope that the dragon loses interest and leaves on its own, as confronting a dragon is far beyond their capability. Despite the established rule that no one should provoke the dragon, panic grips one of the adventurers, who, driven by sheer terror, breaks the rule and attacks the dragon. This ill-fated decision immediately turns disastrous, as the dragon retaliates with overwhelming force, swiftly annihilating the entire B-rank team. The sight of their comrades being decimated leaves the remaining adventurers in utter shock and fear. With no other options left, Zaid urgently commands everyone to retreat in hopes of escaping the dragon's wrath. However, their desperate attempt to flee is met with an even more dire predicament as the dragon conjures a powerful magical barrier that surrounds and encloses them. This barrier effectively traps them within its confines, and it becomes painfully clear that the dragon intends to ensure no one escapes. The adventurers are now completely isolated, facing a terrifying creature, with no chance of fighting back or finding a way out. A sense of doom and helplessness settles over them as they confront the grim reality of their situation. Rick, despite the overwhelming danger, starts walking directly toward the enormous, fearsome dragon. Zaid, who is deeply concerned for Rick's safety, urgently tells him to stop. He explains that as a receptionist with no combat training, Rick has no chance against such a powerful foe. But Rick, feeling a mix of resignation and defiance, thinks that if he is going to face his end, he might as well confront it head-on, channeling the spirit of an adventurer he once aspired to be. Even though he had long given up on his dreams of becoming an adventurer, the fiery ambition inside him still burns strong. He grabs a rock from the ground and throws it at the dragon, though it barely even distracts the beast. Despite the futility of his action, Rick's brave stance has a profound effect on those around him. His willingness to face the dragon, even with nothing but a rock and a heart full of determination, sparks a glimmer of hope and courage in the other adventurers. They see Rick's fearless act as a beacon of bravery, and it inspires them to dig deep, rally their strengths, and fight back with everything they have. The dragon, initially seemingly unstoppable, now faces a united front of adventurers who are fueled by Rick's courage, transforming their desperation into a fierce, collective effort to survive and overcome the dire threat. Even though everyone knows they are likely going to lose, all the adventurers decide to give it their all and start launching every attack they can against the dragon. Unfortunately, their efforts only anger the dragon, causing it to unleash a powerful breath of fire. Seeing the danger escalate, Zaid quickly activates his iron body skill to shield everyone from the worst of the flames. While this protects them from the initial blast, they still endure significant damage from the fiery onslaught. Despite the chaos and pain, Rick stands up from the flaming rumble and walks determinedly towards the dragon. He declares that he will achieve his dream no matter what, even in the face of imminent death. The dragon, in response, attempts to crush Rick with its enormous foot. On the brink of being squashed, Rick's long-hidden innate skill suddenly awakens, granting him extraordinary power. This newfound strength allows him not only to survive the dragon's crushing blow, but also to push the massive creature away with surprising ease. The surge of magic flowing from Rick's body is so intense that it becomes visible to everyone around him. At that moment, Rick realizes that this overwhelming magic is the very essence of his innate skill, something he has just discovered in the midst of life-threatening danger. Even though Rick regrets that his innate skill didn't awaken sooner, he tells himself it's better late than never. With this newfound power, he feels a surge of confidence that drives him to face the dragon head-on. As the dragon unleashes another terrifying blast of fire towards him, Rick extends his hand, using his magical energy to shield himself from the intense heat. When the moment arrives for him to counterattack, he channels all his newfound power into a single mighty punch. The impact is so powerful that it tears a gaping hole through the dragon's body, and the beast falls lifeless to the ground almost immediately. After this intense battle, Rick's strength gives out, and he collapses from exhaustion. When he regains consciousness, he finds himself lying in a hospital bed, his body aching all over. Renette is there, looking concerned, and she explains that during the fight, Rick's magic circuits were pushed to their absolute limits, causing him to overload every single one. She tells him that, according to all medical and magical knowledge, he should have died from the extreme strain. Rick has been in a deep unconscious state for nearly a week, and during this entire time, Reinette has steadfastly remained by his side, never leaving his hospital room. Her commitment is driven by a significant purpose. She wants to extend a personal invitation to Rick to join her esteemed adventuring party, or Chalcom Fist. This party is on a high-stakes mission to defeat Kaiser Alcipiade, a legendary foe, which perfectly matches Rick's long-cherished dream. Witnessing Rick's incredible bravery and determination, his willingness to fight with nothing but sheer courage, even when he was far from having the power to win, has convinced Reinette that Rick possesses the potential to grow stronger and eventually stand shoulder to shoulder with the S-rank adventurers in her party. This moment is profoundly significant for Rick, as it represents the first time anyone has genuinely supported his dream of becoming an adventurer. The depth of Reinette's faith in his abilities and her belief in his future success deeply moves Rick, causing him to be overcome with emotion. For the first time, he feels a renewed sense of hope and validation, knowing that his dream of adventuring and fighting alongside some of the most skilled adventurers is within reach. We return to the present moment where Rick has just passed his E-rank exam, marking a significant milestone in his life, as he can now proudly declare himself an adventurer. This is a moment he has worked towards for so long, and the excitement is evident on his face. After the announcement of his exam results, Rick heads over to visit Lynx, who is currently recovering in the hospital. Lynx, with an enthusiastic and radiant smile, extends his heartfelt congratulations to Rick on his success in passing the E-rank exam. His excitement is palpable as he eagerly brings up their previous conversation about celebrating with drinks. Rick, overjoyed at the chance to finally relax and enjoy himself, is thrilled at the prospect of hanging out with Lynx and celebrating his achievement. The air is filled with a sense of anticipation and happiness as they look forward to their upcoming celebration. However, as Lynx casually mentions that he would love to visit Rick at his home sometime in the future, Rick's reaction undergoes a dramatic shift. His previously joyful expression suddenly morphs into one of deep discomfort and unease. The thought of Lynx coming to his home seems to stir up a swirl of anxiety and reluctance within Rick, making him visibly tense. This abrupt change in Rick's demeanor introduces an unexpected layer of tension to the conversation, casting a shadow over the otherwise cheerful and celebratory moment. The contrast between Rick's initial excitement and his sudden discomfort highlights a deeper, unspoken concern, adding an element of uncertainty to what should have been a purely joyous occasion. Rick, trying to ease Lynx's curiosity, makes a special effort to convince him that a visit to his home might be more intense than anticipated. Despite Rick's insistence that Lynx wears his most robust armor to ensure his safety, Lynx remains puzzled by the seemingly excessive precaution. As Lynx follows the directions and arrives at the address, he is taken aback to discover that Rick lives in what looks like a demon lord's castle. The imposing exterior is nothing like he expected. When he finally reaches the front door and rings the bell, Rick greets him warmly, stepping out to meet him. Once inside the castle, Lynx is pleasantly surprised by the surprisingly welcoming and well-maintained interior, which contrasts sharply with the daunting exterior. Rick, noting Lynx's astonished expression, apologizes for the effort it took to come all the way out to such an unusual place. Lynx reassures him that it's no trouble at all, especially since he didn't encounter any monsters on his journey to the castle. This encounter, while unconventional, only deepens Lynx's appreciation for Rick and his unique living situation. Rick explains to Lynx that monsters never come near the castle, which leads Lynx to wonder why he needs to wear armor if there's no danger from monsters. Rick reassures him that the armor is for his protection, though it might not be from monsters specifically. As they walk into the mansion, they find Reinette waiting to greet Lynx. Lynx thanks her warmly for her earlier help, and she responds with a smile. At that moment, Alice comes bustling down the stairs, clearly thrilled to see Rick. In her excitement, she unleashes a massive lightning spell aimed directly at Lynx. If the spell had actually struck him, Lynx would have been in grave danger, but Rick reacts swiftly, pushing Lynx out of harm's way. The lightning bolt instead hits the wall, creating a large, smoking hole. Rick, visibly upset, scolds Alice for using such powerful magic inside the castle, reminding her that he had specifically warned her against doing so. Alice complains that Rick hasn't played with her for quite some time, which made her feel bored and led her to act out with her magic. She doesn't seem to feel any remorse for what she did, so Reinette steps in to address the situation. She informs Alice that, as punishment for the damage caused by her lightning spell, the cost of repairing the wall will be deducted from Alice's food budget. This news finally prompts Alice to apologize for her reckless behavior, and she promises that she will never use magic inside the castle again. Despite this, Rick is well aware that Alice is likely to break her promise as soon as she feels bored again. To handle the situation, Rick tells Lynx to go ahead and explore the mansion while he stays behind to entertain Alice. Lynx is told to make himself at home, but the mansion is so vast and intricate that he's unsure where to begin or how to navigate it. Lynx glances out the window and notices Mazette working on some impressive military-grade weapons, so he decides to walk over and greet him. Rick had mentioned Lynx's visit to Mazette beforehand, so Mazette welcomed Lynx with a friendly smile. Lynx, intrigued, asks what Mazette is working on. Mazette explains that crafting these advanced weapons is an old hobby of his, and he has given this particular weapon the name Patricia. Excited to share his creation, Mazette offers Lynx the chance to test it out. He carefully shows Lynx how to hold the weapon correctly and helps him line up a shot at a target. When Lynx pulls the trigger, he's taken aback by the incredible power and force that Patricia unleashes. Mazette, clearly enjoying himself, admits that he's packed a lot of power into this weapon just for the fun of it, making Lynx even more amazed by the impressive piece of machinery. As Lynx roams through the castle, he comes across a door labeled Browston's room and is taken aback when he sees an orc inside. Intrigued, Lynx leans in to get a closer look. Browston, noticing Lynx's curiosity, calls out and invites him to come in if he's interested. Lynx, eager to explore further, accepts the invitation and steps into Browston's room. Once inside, Lynx is struck by the sight of the room, which is overflowing with books. Shelves line the walls, and stacks of books are scattered around, creating an impressive library. Browston, seeing Lynx's amazement, explains that he has a deep love for books and enjoys having them all around him. He tells Lynx that he has been collecting books for years, though recently he has been spending a lot of time training Rick. Because of this, he hasn't had the opportunity to read all the new books he's added to his collection. Despite this, Browston remains enthusiastic about his library and seems happy to share his passion with Lynx. After Browston shares his passion for books and how his recent focus on training Rick has kept him from reading all the new additions to his collection, Lynx asks if Browston is the main person responsible for overseeing most of Rick's training. Browston confirms that he has indeed been the primary trainer. Lynx, clearly excited and eager, then asks if Browston would be willing to train him as well. Noticing Lynx's enthusiastic and determined expression, Browston agrees to give him a lesson. Lynx is overjoyed by this opportunity and eagerly accepts. Meanwhile, after spending some time playing with Alice, Rick sets out to find Lynx so they can head out for drinks together. However, when he checks in with Mazette, he is horrified to learn that Mazette saw Lynx heading into the forest with Browston. Rick's face turns pale with worry as he recalls just how intense and demanding Browston's training sessions can be. He knows from experience how challenging and tough Browston's methods are, and the thought of Lynx facing such rigorous training fills him with deep concern for his friend's safety. Meanwhile, Lynx finds himself tumbling off the edge of a steep cliff, with heavy weights trapped tightly to his ankles. As he hurtles toward what he believes will be his doom, he starts to say his goodbyes, tearfully apologizing to his daughters for not being able to return home. In the midst of his descent, he is astonished to land on the large, soft belly of a boar that Renette had intended for dinner. Once he safely dismounts, Lynx breathes a sigh of relief and sincerely thanks Renette for saving his life. Renette, noticing the cumbersome weight still attached to Lynx, quickly deduces that Browston must be responsible for this dangerous stunt. Lynx confirms her guess, explaining that Browston had given him the seemingly insane order to run down the cliff while carrying the weights. Before Lynx could even begin to process how absurd the task was, Browston had already taken things a step further by pushing Rick off the cliff as well. Lynx, who had genuinely believed he was facing certain death, is visibly shaken. Renette, acknowledging the gravity of the situation, agrees with Lynx's fears and explains that his concern is justified, as Browston is infamous for being the leading cause of Rick's many near-fatal training incidents. Once Browston's training begins, there's no avoiding it, and Lynx is quickly dragged off into the forest for more of Browston's demanding exercises. By the end of the day, Lynx is still alive but completely worn out and drained from the relentless training. When Rick sees Lynx's condition, he can't help but ask why Lynx agreed to train with Browston, knowing what Browston had previously put him through. Lynx admits he didn't think it would be that harsh because Browston had assured him it would be just some light training. Lynx now realizes that this was a huge mistake. Rick, who has endured Browston's intense training himself, explains that you should never trust what people say in this environment. He advises that Browston will never take it easy on you, Alice will always act unpredictably, and Mizette's reliability is questionable at best. For those who have been around this group for a while, this kind of behavior is normal and expected. The others don't view it as a big issue since they are accustomed to their unconventional ways. Furthermore, Ralston has the unique ability to revive people even if they die during his brutal training sessions, so he doesn't see any real harm in pushing limits. The group even suggests that if Lynx ends up traumatized or hurt, it's Rick's fault for inviting him into this chaotic and extreme training environment in the first place. A little while later, after Lynx has had some time to recover from the grueling training session, he and Rick sit down in a cozy corner of the castle. Reenet graciously brings them each a steaming cup of tea as they wait for dinner to be served. As Reenet finishes serving and leaves the room, Lynx looks thoughtfully at the door and comments on how genuinely kind and considerate Reenet is. This leads him to ask Rick about his relationship with her. Rick explains that there is no romantic involvement between them. He goes on to say that, being in his 30s, he considers himself quite ordinary and doesn't believe a relationship with Reenet, who is only 16, would be suitable or feasible. Despite Rick's explanation, Lynx notices the way Rick's eyes light up when he talks about Reenet and how he clearly admires her. Lynx points out that it seems Rick has strong feelings for Reenet and argues that age is just a number. He suggests that if Rick truly has feelings for her, there shouldn't be anything holding him back from expressing his interest in asking her out. Lynx believes that taking a chance might be worth it, despite the age difference, especially since it's clear that Rick's feelings for Reenet are genuine. Later that evening, after Reenet has put the finishing touches on the meal, everyone gathers in the dining room, eagerly anticipating dinner. As the group settles around the table, Lynx takes a moment to praise Reenet for her impressive cooking skills, noting how much he and the others appreciate her effort. The compliments are heartfelt, and it's clear that everyone is thoroughly enjoying the meal. The dishes are not only delicious, but also beautifully presented. As the dinner progresses, requests for refills start coming in from various corners of the table. Everyone asks for more of this and that, from additional servings of vegetables to more drinks. Reenet, clearly delighted by the positive reception and the chance to help, gets up with a smile. She moves gracefully around the table, gathering empty plates and used glasses while making her way to the kitchen to get all the refills. She works efficiently, ensuring that each request is met promptly. The atmosphere of the dining room is filled with warmth and appreciation as Reenet attends to everyone's needs, making sure that the meal continues smoothly and that everyone has everything they need to fully enjoy the evening. As Reenet leaves the dining room to handle the refills, Lynx seizes the moment to lean over and quietly suggest to Rick that this is a perfect opportunity to spend some private time with Reenet and possibly take their relationship to the next level. Encouraged by Lynx's advice and realizing the chance to connect with Reenet, Rick decides to get up and offer his help. After Rick departs to assist Reenet, Lynx turns his attention to the others at the table and starts a conversation about Rick's special skill. Curious to learn more, Lynx asks them to elaborate on how Rick's skill works. Ralston takes the opportunity to explain that Rick's skill, which is called Reckless Soul, only activates under certain specific conditions. This means that Rick cannot simply turn it on or use it at will. Ralston adds that it would be more beneficial if Rick's skill were either always active or could be activated voluntarily whenever needed. Despite the limitation of not being able to control the skill's activation, Rick's power level is already impressive, categorized as S rank. This indicates he is extremely powerful. Ralston points out that if Rick's Reckless Soul were to activate, it would significantly enhance his abilities, allowing him to surpass everyone present with ease. This gives a sense of just how formidable Rick could become if he could fully harness his skill's potential. After Rick and Reenet return, Ralston says he has something he wishes to ask Lynx. Since he works at Central, he wants to know if Lynx has heard anything about the magic stones known as the 6 jewels. Lynx recognizes those as the ones from the Legends of Yamato, and they are necessary for the party to accomplish their goal of defeating Kaiser Alcipiade. Those jewels are used to open the door to the Source Spiral, where Kaiser sleeps, and they only activate once every 200 years. But luckily, this is around the time when they should be giving off a lot of magical energy. So they want to know if Lynx has seen or heard anything about it. Lynx had thought the Legends of Yamato were just an urban legend, but if Rick and the others are talking about it so seriously, the story must be true. He can't think of any information that would match the description of the jewels, but he can check the confidential information at the Central Agency to see if he finds anything. Broston says he is grateful for Lynx's help, and after that, Rick asks Lynx if he has any more relationship advice to give, since Rick's plan to help Renette out didn't go so well since she's just too good at everything. On a different day at the Adventurers Guild, a young girl diligently mops the floors, though she feels a twinge of dissatisfaction with her current role. As an adventurer herself, she believes she should be out slaying monsters and taking on exciting quests rather than performing such routine chores. While she's lost in thought, she hears a commotion at the front desk where a group of adventurers is discussing a quest. Interested, she decides to see what's going on. When she arrives at the desk, she finds Rick and his team requesting to undertake a quest with a threat level of 82. The guild master, who is familiar with Rick and his team's impressive abilities, informs them that, unfortunately, they cannot take on the quest at this time. Despite recognizing that Rick and his team are more than capable of handling the challenge, the guild master explains that the rules are quite specific. To accept a quest of such high threat level, the guild requires a party of 4 members, with at least 2 of those members being A-rank adventurers or higher. This strict requirement is in place to ensure that only adequately prepared teams tackle the most dangerous missions, which means Rick and his team cannot proceed without meeting the guild's regulations. The situation seems straightforward to resolve, so Rick and his team request the guild master to find someone to join their party, thus fulfilling the requirement to take on the quest. Conveniently, the nearest available person is Ray, the young girl currently mopping the floors. The guild master approaches her, knowing she has recently expressed a strong desire for real adventuring experiences. He offers her the opportunity to fill in as the 4th member of the Orichalcum Fist team for this quest. Ray, although somewhat puzzled by the formality, is excited by the chance to be involved in an actual adventure. She notices that the team consists of an elderly man and a young girl, which seems like a typical adventuring party to her. She chooses to disregard the unusual fact that the old man, Ralston, is a talking work and decides to accept the situation as just another day in the life of adventurers. Ray introduces herself to the team, explaining that she's eager to join them and help with the quest. As they embark on their journey, Alice, one of the team members, suddenly mentions that she senses something unusual up ahead. Intrigued, Ray asks Alice if they are on a quest to find something specific or if there's an unusual presence they are tracking. Rick explains to Ray that the reason they are out on this quest is that they received a tip from a trusted friend about a special magic stone believed to be hidden somewhere in this area. This is the primary reason they have embarked on this adventure. Hearing about the magic stone, Ray's curiosity is piqued, and she immediately starts to think about its potential value. She wonders how much they could possibly sell such a rare item for, envisioning a substantial profit. Rick quickly clarifies that despite the stone's likely high value, they have no intention of selling it. The reason is that the stone is extremely dangerous if it ends up in the wrong hands. It could not only pose significant risks, but also attract unwanted attention from monsters. Ray, however, is not deterred by these dangers. She confidently states that she's more than capable of handling any monsters that might come their way. Ray mentions that although she is currently an F-rank adventurer, she is determined to quickly advance through the ranks and reach A rank in the near future. With a sense of ambition, she turns to Rick and inquires about his rank. Rick responds that he was recently promoted to E rank, which is a modest advancement from the lower ranks, but still a considerable way from the higher ranks of adventuring prowess. While Ray keeps her thoughts to herself, she internally judges Rick, thinking of him as an old loser for still being E rank at his age. A little later, as they continue their quest, Alice spots a wyvern in the distance. This is the exact type of creature they were hoping to find, but Ray's excitement quickly turns to panic when she realizes the danger. Wyverns are known to be extremely powerful and formidable opponents. Ray's anxiety escalates as she imagines the potential threat. Meanwhile, Broston calmly walks up to the wyvern and with a swift motion slaps it away. He deliberately avoids killing the wyvern, knowing that by doing so, it will likely summon reinforcements. This tactic, however, only makes Ray more anxious. The thought of facing a swarm of wyverns, which could easily spell disaster for any adventurer, fills her with dread. The idea of a horde of these creatures coming to their location feels like a death sentence to her, making her increasingly fearful about the situation they are now facing. Broston is getting sick of all her complaining, so he asks Rick to take Ray and go somewhere else for now. So Rick leads her out of the forest. Along the way, Ray begins talking about how crazy it was for Broston to intentionally attract the attention of all those wyverns, but a couple seconds later, wyvern corpses begin crashing to the ground as Broston and Alice start slaughtering them. Ray is dumbfounded by what she sees, and while she is stunned, she nearly gets taken out by a red wyvern, so Rick pulls her to safety. A red wyvern is so tough that even A-rank adventurers struggle to defeat one, so Ray thinks they need to get out of there since she's F-rank and Rick is E-rank. But Rick just walks up to the wyvern and blows its head clean off its body with one punch, leaving Ray stunned once more. By the next day, Ray is deep in thought over what happened to her yesterday, and the guild master is glad to see she made it out alive. He tells her that Orichalcum Fist is the strongest party on the continent, and it is made up of adventurers who are all S-rank level. The whole experience has motivated Ray to train hard until she can eventually get to S-rank, so she hands her broom to the guild master so she can start training immediately. But sweeping the floors is kind of her job, so the guild master is not happy. Meanwhile, after returning from the wyvern hunt, Rick and the others were able to retrieve one of the jewels from the wyvern's den, and with it, Mazette is able to use magic to pin the location of the next jewel they need to find. It looks like it's located in Herotopia, a large city known for its colosseums and strong fighters. 400 years ago, in a land mostly comprised of desert, a king named Alexander Herotopia built a colosseum where strong fighters could gather and face each other in battle. The king himself also participated in battles, and over the years he became the undefeated champion with 10,000 victories and no losses. The popularity of the colosseum gave rise to the kingdom of Haraya, and now King Alexander Herotopia is immortalized as the kingdom's founder. Rosen wishes he could have gotten to spar with Alexander at least once before he died. But if that happened, the whole kingdom would likely be blown away in the process. In Herotopia, being a fighter is a popular profession, but while Broston would love to learn more about this place, he thinks it would be a good idea to start looking for the item they came here for. The others agree, so they all start looking around together. But whenever they try to ask someone for information, the person gets scared because of Broston and runs away. They aren't going to make any progress like this, so Rick suggests that they could go to Town Hall instead to see if they can find some useful info there. However, just as they are about to leave, they notice a girl being harassed by a guy she wants nothing to do with. So Rick is about to step in, but Broston cuts him off and walks up to the guy instead. The guy is at least brave enough to stand his ground, but he seriously messes up when he challenges Broston to a fight. Broston is always down for a good round of violence, so he walks into a dark alley, and as soon as they are out of sight, the distinct sound of a skull cracking is heard. Broston walks back out with the guy's limp body. The guy managed to survive somehow, and having such a near-death experience seems to have knocked the scumbag right out of him. So he's now an upstanding citizen and introduces himself as Gold. The girl also introduces herself as Nultia, and Broston says he has something he would like to ask both of them. He takes out the red jewel and asks if they have any idea there's something like this in town. Gold says he has seen something similar before, but he doesn't remember where. Nultia also recognizes the jewel, but she's having a hard time recalling where she has seen it before. Just then, a loud parade for this year's fighting tournament passes by, and both Nultia and Gold are excited about it. There are apparently only 2 more months before the King of Fists tournament officially begins, but Renette doesn't know anything about it. Gold explains that it is a tournament to decide the champion of all fighters, and it's so popular that they get over 500,000 spectators each year. steal a belt. They are specifically after the jewel in the belt because it belonged to a former member of their party a long time ago, and they need it for something important. But of course, he will have a perfect replacement gem made so they can put that in the belt instead. The owner thinks Browston is lying, so he starts calling for someone from the gym to come over and kick these crazy people out. However, Kerwin tells him there's no need for that. He has a very unique nose, so he can smell when someone is lying, and Browston doesn't give off the scent of a liar. But while he may believe that Browston's party is the original owner of the gem, he still can't just hand it over to him because this belt is the pride of Haraya. The only way Browston will be getting his hands on this belt is if he becomes the new champion of the tournament. Browston thinks that's a reasonable condition, so he turns around to leave. Rick begins asking if Browston is seriously going to leave without the jewel, but Browston is fine with it since he just has to win the tournament to get what he wants. They all leave, and the owner starts complaining about how rude those people are. But if Kerwin had let the owner try and kick them out like he wanted to, they would have gotten into a fight that would have killed everyone in this gym. The owner breaks out in a cold sweat over Kerwin's statement. He knew that they didn't look like average people, but he never would have guessed they were that strong. Kerwin states that from how May carries herself, he can tell that she has a wide array of lethal skills. Then there's the normal-looking man, but while he seems unremarkable, Kerwin can tell that he has trained his body to an inhuman degree, so he isn't one to be messed with. Finally, there's Browston, and by every indication, he's the most interesting. Meanwhile, outside, Browston explains to Rick and Renette that he thinks they should all join the tournament as fighters so they can win the belt fair and square. In order to enter the tournament, one must first pass the preliminaries held in the east and west of the kingdom, after which you need to win another match among those who qualified from the preliminaries, and that's when you are finally allowed to participate in the tournament. Rosen says he will apply through the eastern gate, while Rick and Renette can enter through the western gate, so they'll all be in different tournament brackets. Rick and Renette are fine with the plan, but they ask Rosen if he will be really okay getting around town by himself. But there's no need to worry since Rosen already got Gold to agree to guide him around town in order to register for the preliminaries. Rick and Renette are going to need to pass a test first, which is a lot like the promotion exams at the Adventurers Guild. As Rick enters the arena for his test, he's informed that he will be required to fight a mock battle to gauge his strength. His opponent will be one of the newly recruited fighters from the previous batch. Rick asks if his opponent is going to be strong, so the examiner checks the forms and tells him that the girl he is going to be fighting has won every match up till now. But whether Rick wins or loses, he will still pass the exam as long as he meets certain criteria. All of a sudden, the doors swing wide open, and a very familiar voice begins to introduce herself. She confidently declares that because of her speed, people have started calling her in the Flash. So whoever is up against her next has better watch out. However, her confidence goes down the drain completely as soon as she recognizes Rick. Angelica asks why Rick is here, but he could easily ask her the same question. He's also a bit worried about the awkwardness after what happened last time. But Angelica tells him that her siblings aren't here with her, so Rick doesn't have to worry. With that said, she knows how powerful Rick is, so it's terrible luck that she has to face him in a mock battle. Even if a loss won't really have any consequences, she has an undefeated streak going, so if she would like to keep it going, she decides to go all out from the start against Rick in hopes of overwhelming him with her speed. But as she tries to attack, she falls flat on the ground. She thinks she must have tripped since she is so nervous, so she gets back up and prepares to dash Rick again. However, the same thing happens, so she realizes that she isn't falling because she is nervous. She's falling because Rick is doing something. Rick looks down at Angelica and asks her what she thinks of the new skill he has been practicing over the last few months. After realizing how strong he had gotten, Rick didn't want to risk hurting the people around him if he ever got into a fight, so he developed the 8 secret arts of going easy. Right now, he is using the first art, which is basically constant leg sweeps. This is really effective because leg sweeps demoralize and incapacitate opponents as they fail to get up, and it barely does any damage. Angelica thinks it's insulting, but Rick points out that she hasn't been hurt because of the leg sweeps. Even if Rick is only doing leg sweeps, he is doing them at a speed that Angelica can't keep track of. Even with her exceptional speed, it would normally be impossible to pull something like that off, but after the stuff she has seen Rick do, she isn't surprised that he can manage it. Angelica thinks the best thing to do is to keep her distance from Rick, but even as she tries to step back, Rick manages to sweep her legs again, making her fall. Despite this, she refuses to give up and keeps on fighting. Rick is impressed by her determination and says he will start taking the fight seriously from now on. However, as soon as Rick makes this promise, Angelica decides to give up in frustration, feeling that it's not worth it. Rick is a bit let down that their match ended so quickly, but he is pleased that his victory means he is now recognized as a fighter and can proceed to register for the preliminaries. Just as he is about to head over to complete his registration, Angelica rushes up to him once more and asks why he had to come here in the first place, clearly wanting to understand his motives better. Angelica is deeply upset and starts crying because she feels it's unfair how Rick manages to beat her every time they fight. She pours out her feelings, and Rick grows concerned that she might be misinterpreting his actions or intentions. To address the misunderstanding and to offer some comfort, Rick suggests that they all go out to eat together. He hopes that a meal will give them a chance to talk things through and clear up any confusion. They end up going to a restaurant, which turns out to be owned by Milcia's parents. Milcia is delighted to offer Rick and Renette a free meal as a gesture of gratitude and kindness. Rick appreciates the offer and thanks her warmly. As Milcia is about to leave, she hesitates and asks Rick if Brostan will be coming to the restaurant as well. She reveals that she has a bit of a crush on him and is hoping to see him there, which adds a personal touch to her request. Rick tells Milcia that Brostan is currently registering on the eastern side of town, so it looks like they won't be able to catch up with him for a while. Milcia, a bit disappointed by this news, decides to leave and head off on her own. Once Milcia leaves, Rick, Angelica, and Renette are left alone. Angelica, with a look of curiosity and interest, turns to Rick and asks him why he chose to come to this place. Rick responds calmly, explaining that his goal is to win the tournament. This answer surprises Angelica, as she finds it hard to believe that Rick is so relaxed about trying to win such a significant and challenging event. His nonchalant attitude towards a competition of this scale clearly catches her off guard. Seeing her surprised reaction, Rick decides to steer the conversation in a different direction and asks Angelica about her own reasons for participating in the tournament. He is keen to understand why someone with her reputation as a talented swordswoman would choose to compete in this demanding contest, where the stakes are high and the competition is fierce. Rick is especially curious about why someone with Angelica's impressive skills as a swordswoman would choose to compete in a tournament that is known for its tough and varied competition. He finds it fascinating that she has decided to put aside her sword and enter a tournament where fighters rely solely on their fists. This shift from her usual weapon to a completely different fighting style intrigues him deeply. Rick is eager to understand her reasons for making such a big change. Angelica explains that she has her own personal reasons for wanting to join the tournament, but she chooses to keep those reasons private for the time being. Her decision to switch from a weapon-based combat style to a fist-fighting tournament makes Rick even more interested in her motivations and what drives her to take on this challenge. Rick, now even more intrigued, asks Angelica if she is planning to join the tournament, and she confirms with a nod that she definitely intends to compete. This news sparks excitement in Rick and gives him a fresh burst of motivation. It energizes him and makes him more determined to give his all in the upcoming tournament. He knows he will face tough competitors and must be at his best. Rick is genuinely surprised by Angelica's strong commitment to participating, especially since he initially thought he would have more time and was planning to focus on the tournament the following year. Angelica goes on to explain that the process to qualify for the tournament's preliminaries is very demanding. To even get a chance to be considered for the preliminaries, a fighter has to win at least 40 matches against different opponents. This shows just how challenging and intense the qualification process is, highlighting the hard work and dedication required to meet these tough standards. The qualification process for the tournament is exceptionally demanding and far from straightforward. Fighters must engage in numerous battles and consistently win to prove their skills and readiness. This process emphasizes how serious and challenging the tournament is, making it clear that simply showing up isn't enough. To qualify, a fighter must secure many victories, demonstrating their ability to handle intense competition and show true dedication. This rigorous requirement not only tests a fighter's physical endurance but also their strategic thinking and overall capability. The high number of matches needed to qualify reflects the fierce level of competition and the substantial commitment required. It highlights the considerable effort needed to succeed, revealing how tough it is to enter and perform well in such a high-stakes tournament. This qualification process serves as a true test of both mental and physical strength, underlining the significant challenge and high level of competition that awaits. As soon as the next day arrives, Rick walks into the arena, fully prepared for the demanding and exhausting challenge that lies ahead. His first opponent in this grueling series of fights is a fighter named Grit, who is set to test Rick's stamina and resolve right from the start. The match coordinator gives Rick a heads up, warning him about Grit's reputation for using hidden weapons to cheat, though no one has ever been able to catch him in the act during a match. As Rick faces Grit, he notes that Grit looks a bit shady but doesn't see any clear evidence of weapons on him, which makes Rick feel confident that he can handle the fight without trouble. Just as the match is about to begin, Grit surprises everyone by revealing an impact stone he had cleverly concealed in his shoe. Impact stones are known for massively increasing the power of a punch, which adds a new level of challenge to the match. Impact stones are known to greatly enhance the power of a punch, so when Grit delivers a punch to Rick, the impact creates a huge dust cloud from the sheer force of the blow. Once the dust clears and the visibility improves, it's evident that Grit is the only one hurt. He has sustained severe injuries, including having 2 new elbows that were not part of his original anatomy. Grit is baffled by the outcome, especially since he had been able to easily break boulders with the impact stone and didn't understand why it didn't work as expected against Rick. With Raster's turn now over, Rick prepares to show off his unique strategy, known as the secret art of going easy. He throws a punch but deliberately misses, aiming to use the force of the air from the punch to knock Raster out rather than landing a direct hit. This way, Rick ensures that Raster doesn't suffer any serious injuries. The audience watches in stunned silence as Rick's ingenious move ends the match in a surprising and unexpected way. The Tournament of Fists is shaping up to be incredibly exciting this year, and Rick's performance sets a high standard for the upcoming battles. Rick and Rionette cheer for Angelica as she triumphantly wins her 40th match, fulfilling all the necessary criteria to qualify for the preliminaries. This success energizes Rick even further, pushing him to aim for excellence in all his upcoming matches. However, Angelica is still baffled by Rick's ambitious goal of completing 40 matches within a mere 4 days. She struggles to comprehend how Rick plans to achieve this feat. Despite Rick's unwavering confidence, he doesn't fully grasp the difficulty of the task at hand. Angelica tries to clarify the situation by explaining that competitors are restricted to registering for only 1 match per day at each venue. The complexity increases because Herotopia boasts over 10 different venues, some of which are located in very remote areas, sometimes up to 100 kilometers away from any other venue. This geographical spread makes the logistics of traveling between venues and scheduling all the matches within a short time frame exceptionally challenging. Traveling between the numerous venues and finding the time to fit all of his matches into the schedule should be nearly impossible because of the great distances involved. The venues are scattered far apart, and some are incredibly remote, with the nearest ones being up to 100 kilometers away from each other. This means that even though there are more than 10 venues in Herotopia, managing to get from one to another within a tight time frame is a daunting challenge. Despite Angelica's detailed explanation about the logistical nightmare of traveling such long distances and the limitations of the transportation available, Rick cuts her off. He casually mentions that he has a match coming up soon at the Green Hill venue. Angelica is taken aback and insists that it's completely unrealistic for him to make it there in time because that venue is over 30 kilometers away. Even the fastest carriage would struggle to cover such a distance quickly enough. Rick, however, never mentioned using a carriage. He simply plans to run to get there. To Angelica, this seems like a crazy and reckless idea. But as Rick takes off with incredible speed, disappearing into a cloud of dust almost instantly, Angelica is struck by the reality of how fast he truly is. Watching Rick's astonishing speed makes her realize that she's no longer living up to her own reputation as the Flash. She feels a deep sense of inadequacy and loss as she struggles to come to terms with her diminished sense of identity compared to Rick's extraordinary abilities. Rionette asks Angelica if she wants to go watch Rick's match, and Angelica definitely does want to see it. But she knows that even with her own impressive speed, she won't be able to keep up with Rick. Seeing that Angelica is concerned, Rionette offers to take her there instead. Although Angelica feels uneasy about this and is hesitant to agree, before she can voice her concerns, Rionette has already picked her up. Rionette starts leaping from roof to roof at high speed, leaving Angelica feeling panicked and begging her to go back down to the ground. Rionette, however, prefers to avoid the roads, which she finds too confusing and frustrating. Angelica finally arrives at the arena to watch Rick's fight, but she spends most of the time feeling so sick from the high-speed journey that she misses the entire match. When she finally meets up with Rick, he mentions that he didn't perform well in the fight because he still needs more practice to make his attacks non-lethal. He says he'll have to work on that later since he's already late for his next match, and runs off. Angelica, dreading the thought of being carried around by Renette again, tries to back out of the plan. Unfortunately, Renette is already set on taking her, so she grabs Angelica and begins hopping through the town at high speed once more. Rick keeps winning his matches with ease all around town, showing off his incredible skills and determination. Meanwhile, Angelica is having a tough time coping with severe motion sickness because Renette keeps carrying her everywhere. The 4 days pass quickly, and Rick ends up winning all 40 of his matches, which means he has officially qualified for the preliminaries. With this accomplishment, he is ready to move on to the next stage, the League. Angelica feels a sense of relief because she won't have to face Rick in the same bracket, so she won't be fighting him directly for now. Renette then asks Angelica if she is hoping to win the tournament. Angelica admits that she would have liked to win since she's already participating, but with Rick in the tournament, she knows her chances of winning are practically zero. To make things even more challenging, Angelica learns that Brauston is also competing. Though she has never met Brauston, Renette mentions that he trained Rick, which makes Angelica realize that Brauston must be even more formidable than Rick. Even though winning seems nearly impossible for her now, Angelica thinks that participating in the tournament might help her deal with a particular issue she has. Renette asks her who this person is, but Angelica avoids answering and instead changes the subject to ask where Rick has gone. Renette tells her that Rick is currently on a job that involves traveling a staggering 600 kilometers away. By now, Angelica has become accustomed to the strange and extreme things Rick does, so she isn't as surprised as she used to be. She asks Renette how she can stand accompanying Rick all the time, but she has never once bothered Renette. In fact, she kind of enjoys it. Angelica points out that at some point people are going to start rumors that she and Rick are lovers, but again, Angelica wouldn't mind that one bit since she really does have feelings for Rick. Angelica is shocked by how bluntly Renette just said that, but a moment later a guy comes up to them and says he has a request for the two beautiful ladies. Angelica thinks the guy is hitting on them, but in reality he is pleading with them because he is short-staffed and needs some part-time workers. Later that day, Rick gets back from his jog and he is approached by a man named Snape, who is the chairman of the West League. Rick asks how Snape knows him, but it turns out that Rick has become pretty famous around here for being the fastest man to ever qualify in the West League. Snape shakes hands with Rick in a friendly manner, but as they do so, Snape's guard emerges from the bar and informs him that Angelica is not present. Hearing this, Snape looks visibly disappointed, so Rick inquires if Snape knows Angelica. Snape confirms that he is indeed well acquainted with Angelica, mentioning that he is a merchant who maintains a positive relationship with the Diremute family. Sensing a shift in the conversation, Rick asks Snape when he retired from being a fighter. Snape appears taken aback by Rick's knowledge of his past as a fighter, as he had never mentioned it. Rick explains that he could tell from their handshake that Snape's hands showed the marks of a trained fighter. Snape then reveals that he did compete in and win a small tournament many years ago, and the exhilaration of the crowd's cheers was a thrill he has never forgotten. However, that was 2 decades ago, and he has been retired from the fighting scene ever since. Despite this, Snape remains passionate about the sport. His company is sending a fighter to this year's tournament, but due to other pressing business matters, he must cut their conversation short. Before leaving, Snape requests that Rick pass on a message to Angelica, advising her to take good care of her health and not to play around too much, as he is concerned about her well-being. After Snape departs, Rick proceeds into the building, where Milchia approaches him with a concerned look, asking if everything is okay and if there are any issues with Snape. Milchia notices Rick outside, engaged in conversation with Snape. While she's relieved that the discussion didn't lead to any trouble, she expresses her concern for Rick's safety. She warns him to be careful, as despite Snape's seemingly refined demeanor, there are unsettling rumors about him being involved in the criminal underworld. Rick is caught off guard by this revelation, especially considering Snape's connection to Angelica's family. He is further surprised to learn that Snape's company has become the primary sponsor for this year's tournament. This sponsorship grants Snape a unique benefit. He has the privilege of entering a fighter of his choice into the tournament, which could significantly influence the outcome. At that moment, Rick hears a group of guys in the bar chatting about the attractiveness of the bunny girls outside. Their conversation takes a particular interest when they mention a dark elf bunny girl, which piques Rick's curiosity. He feels compelled to see this for himself and decides to check it out. The scene transitions to the West League Stadium, where Angelica and Renette are stationed as promotional bunny girls. Angelica is deeply involved in her role, but it's clear that she isn't there out of genuine enthusiasm. She reluctantly agreed to help because she couldn't turn down the request from the man who asked for their assistance, who appeared to be in a dire situation. Renette explains that her own participation is entirely due to Angelica's commitment. Since Angelica agreed to volunteer, Renette felt it was only fair to join her, despite her own reservations. The job at the stadium isn't too challenging on its own, but dealing with the crowd presents its own difficulties. Drunk individuals often don't know when to stop, and this one man in particular seems to delight in harassing the bunny girls. His behavior is relentless, and he won't stop until they're forced to leave. When he tries to grab Angelica's chest, it's obvious there isn't much there, but the attempt is met with a furious response. Angelica delivers a severe beating, stomping on his head in frustration. The situation is chaotic and intense. As Rick approaches, he's taken aback by Angelica's appearance in the bunny outfit. She feels a mix of embarrassment and awkwardness and tries to explain that she's only doing this to help out. However, Rick's attention soon shifts from Angelica when he notices Renette standing nearby. The chemistry between Rick and Renette is almost tangible, with a strong visible spark that makes their interaction seem electric. This undeniable connection creates a palpable tension in the air, leaving Angelica feeling somewhat out of place and sidelined in the midst of their charged interaction. Meanwhile, Kerwin's coach is casually flipping through a newspaper, and he comes across an article about Browston. The article reports that Browston managed to complete all of his qualification matches in an astounding 2 days. Kerwin's coach remarks that in comparison to Browston's extraordinary accomplishment, Rick's achievement of finishing his matches in 4 days appears to be less remarkable. Yet despite this, he still finds Rick's performance impressive and acknowledges that, within its own context, it is a noteworthy accomplishment. This news heightens his excitement for the upcoming tournament even further, making him eagerly anticipate the fierce and thrilling competition that is about to begin. The coach's mind drifts back to a memorable moment from his past, a time when he ventured into a rough and dilapidated city in search of new and promising fighters. As he recalls, he walked into a grimy, dimly lit bar and encountered Kerwin, who had just defeated an entire gang that had been pursuing him. At that point, Kerwin was notorious in the area as the Hungry Wolf of the Slums, a fierce and relentless fighter with a reputation for taking on any threat head-on. When the coach approached Kerwin, the fighter, seeing the coach's presence, initially believed he was there to challenge him or take him down. However, the coach had a different purpose in mind. Instead of confrontation, he came up with an offer that would change Kerwin's life. The coach wanted to recruit Kerwin to fight for Herotopia, recognizing the extraordinary strength and potential Kerwin possessed. The coach was confident that with Kerwin's exceptional abilities, he could achieve greatness and gain anything he aspired to by succeeding in the numerous fights that awaited him there. The coach continues, mentioning that Herotopia will be filled with a multitude of strong fighters, promising Kerwin a steady stream of challenging matches that will keep him fully engaged and on his toes. This idea greatly excites Kerwin, rekindling a level of enthusiasm and anticipation he hasn't felt in years. He is now completely convinced that this opportunity is exactly what he needs to reignite his passion for fighting. As the next day arrives, signaling the start of the league matches, the atmosphere is charged with tension and excitement. Each block will only allow one fighter to advance to the main tournament, which means every match will be fiercely contested and highly competitive. In Block A, the very first match features Angelica facing off against a formidable opponent named Helen. This match is crucial for Angelica, as her performance will determine whether she moves forward in the tournament or not. The pressure is immense and the stakes are high, setting the stage for a dramatic and intense battle right from the beginning. From the very beginning of the fight, Angelica seems to be putting in much more effort than usual, which is not typical for her. Despite her struggles, Angelica manages to win the match by delivering a powerful kick that sends Helen crashing into the wall. However, even though she wins, Angelica is already feeling exhausted and winded from the tough battle. Next up is Rick's match, and his opponent begins charging up his special move, but Rick just chops him across the neck, knocking him out. The rest of the matches unfold in a similar pattern. Angelica continues to win her bouts through intense and demanding fights, each victory hard-earned. Meanwhile, Rick effortlessly overpowers his opponents, showcasing his incredible skill and speed. Despite her successes, Angelica is aware that to guarantee her advancement to the tournament, she must win every single match. There is no room for error. Rick and Renette, who are nearby, offer their encouragement, urging Angelica to give her best effort. Just as Renette begins to offer some strategic advice for her next fight, Angelica, feeling both determined and anxious, walks away abruptly, leaving him mid-sentence. As her next match begins, Angelica finds herself pitted against a particularly formidable opponent known for his extraordinary durability and strength, often referred to as a tank. Even though Angelica is faster and more agile, her attacks seem much less effective against him due to his robust defenses. In a strategic move to compensate for this, Angelica employs her magical abilities. She conjures a water prison around her opponent and then channels a powerful bolt of lightning into it. Despite the impressive display of magic and energy, her opponent remains upright and mocks her efforts. He taunts Angelica, questioning whether she is running out of stamina and suggesting that her attacks are not sufficient to bring him down. Angelica makes an effort to use her blink step to quickly move in on her opponent, hoping that her speed will give her the edge she needs. Unfortunately, she is already exhausted from the fight, and her energy levels have severely dwindled. As a result, she struggles to keep pace with the formidable fighter in front of her. The opponent, being significantly stronger and more resilient, easily outmatches Angelica, who eventually gets overpowered and knocked out. After the match ends, Angelica is taken to the infirmary, where she receives healing magic to help her recover from the strain of the battle. As she exits the infirmary, she finds Rick waiting outside, looking concerned about her well-being. Despite her reluctance to talk, Rick gently points out that her approach in the fight might have been too hasty. He acknowledges that her opponent's impressive defenses made it a challenging fight from the very beginning. Rick suggests that while it was a tough matchup, Angelica might have had a better chance of winning if she had adjusted her tactics rather than continuing with moves that drained her energy. Even though Angelica is not eager to hear this feedback and prefers to keep her thoughts to herself, Rick remains by her side, sensing that she is dealing with something more than just the physical exhaustion from the match. He hopes that by offering his advice and support, he might help her work through her frustration and find a way to improve her future fights. Angelica eventually caves in and says she'll tell Rick all about her situation. It all started when her parents died, leaving her and her siblings in charge of running the Dire Mute estate. Of course, at the time, they were all still children, so they quickly fell into financial ruin. However, their scheme and Grandpa went and made a deal with a man known as Snape. In exchange for a significant amount of financial support, and in exchange, he agreed to have Angelica engaged to Snape as a way for Snape to have a connection to the nobility. After that, Angelica and her siblings did everything they could to restore the Dire Mute family so they wouldn't have to rely on Snape. But by then, it was already too late to call off the engagement. That is a really complicated situation, but Rick still hasn't gotten over the fact that Angelica is engaged. Angelica, determined to find anything that could potentially cancel her engagement to Snape, starts digging into his past. Her goal is to find some scandalous or compromising information that would give her a solid reason to call off the engagement. However, what she discovers is quite different from what she hoped for. She learns that Snape has recently become a prominent sponsor for the tournament. This position gives him the power to include a fighter of his choosing in the tournament, which could significantly influence the competition. As she contemplates this new development, loud and unsettling noises from a bar nearby grab her attention. Curious about the commotion, Angelica, along with Rick and others, heads over to investigate. Upon arriving at the bar, they are greeted by a chaotic scene. The fighter who previously defeated Angelica is in a heated confrontation with a lizard man. The lizard man is holding a waitress by the neck, clearly causing her distress and fear. The fighter, visibly enraged and determined to help, demands the lizard man release the waitress. Despite his best efforts, the fighter's attempts to intervene are futile. The lizard man, showcasing his immense strength, easily withstands the fighter's punch, and with a powerful counterattack, knocks the fighter unconscious. The lizard man, further mocking the fighter's perceived weakness, continues to harass the helpless waitress, leaving the onlookers shocked and powerless to stop the abuse. But Angelica runs up and yells for him to stop. She knows she stands no chance against Geith, but she can't just sit back and let him do whatever he wants. Geith is offended that another weakling would dare to stand in his way, so he's about to punch Angelica in the face, but Rick catches his arm and tells him to calm down. Geith is about to start a fight here, but Snape suddenly shows up and tells him to quiet down and leave. Geith does as he is told, and Snape apologizes for all the trouble he has caused. Jaith is Snape's younger brother, and he has serious anger management issues, but there has been no one strong enough to put him in check lately, although he does calm down pretty quickly if Snape tells him to. After Snape leaves, Angelica fills Rick in on the situation. She explains that Snape poured a significant amount of money into the engagement deal, which gave him the opportunity to become a sponsor of the tournament. As a sponsor, he has the privilege to place a fighter of his choosing into the competition. His strategy is to leverage this position to manipulate the results of the tournament through gambling rings. By ensuring that his fighter wins, Snape plans to recoup his investment and make a substantial profit. Angelica reveals that this is the real reason she entered the tournament, to take down Snape's fighter and force him to call off the engagement. Despite her resolve, she admits with a heavy heart that she is currently not strong enough to defeat the formidable fighter known as Geeth. Recognizing her predicament, Rick takes a moment to think before making an offer to help. He proposes that he could train her to improve her chances. However, considering the extreme and demanding nature of Rick's past training experiences, Angelica can't shake the feeling that his offer might be more intimidating than reassuring. She worries that his training methods could be so intense that they might push her to her limits or even beyond.